Okay, great. Okay, so we'll be getting started. Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome back to our annual conference, Putting Language to Work. Bienvenue à le langage au service de l'emploi. Good morning, Celine. Je m'appelle Star Kuzbiwanza. Je suis la directrice de la politique et de la recherche de la table ronde provinciale sur l'emploi. It is my pleasure to welcome you to day 2. We have 3 exciting events planned for you today. But first, I would like to begin with the land acknowledgement. So the Provincial Employment Roundtable, or PERT, is situated on unceded Indigenous land. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands on which we primarily conduct our work. Shokshogé or Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, including the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe nations. As a provincial organization at PERT, we represent and work with communities and organizations across the territory of Quebec, which are situated on Inuit and First Nations territory. We would also like to address the ways in which both our research and policy, which are the 2 cornerstones of PERT's mandate, have historically and currently failed or contributed to the oppression and harm of Inuit and First Nations in Quebec. We aim to develop in solidarity with Indigenous peoples work that centers the importance of representation and equitable research and policy, and particularly values of linguistic diversity and revitalization. So today we'll be continuing our discussions on the relationships between language and work for English-speaking Quebecers. Pour nos participants francophones, une traduction simultanée sera disponible de l'anglais anglais au français. Si vous utilisez un ordinateur, vous devriez voir le bouton Interprétation en bas à droite de l'écran. Pour ceux qui utilisent des applications mobiles, doivent cliquer sur les 3 points en bas à droite de leur écran. Vous devriez voir l'option de choisir le flux audio français. Vous aurez également la possibilité de couper ou non l'audio original. J'espère que c'était clair, mais si vous avez des difficultés pour accéder à la traduction simultanée, et si vous avez des questions, veuillez informer notre équipe dans le chat. Alors, our first panel this morning will be Learning French for the Workforce, which features 4 great panelists and will be moderated by our Executive Director at PERT, Nicholas Salter. We will then be taking a short break and we'll reconvene for our 11 a.m. panel, which will explore the issues of French in Quebec's professional orders. And this will be moderated by André Rousseau, who is the General Director of Cible Réseau à l'Emploi. And then after lunch, we will have our final panel, which explores the relationships between education and employment for Quebec's English-speaking communities. This panel will be hosted by Lorraine O'Donnell, who is the Research Associate at the Quebec English-speaking Communities Research Network, also known as QuestGRN. So we really look forward to engaging with you today. All our panels will explore how language and work intersect for English-speaking Quebecers, and we are focused on discussing solutions to help address the employment and employability challenges that are facing our communities. Yesterday, we had some really great conversations, some great comments in the chat. We also had some wonderful questions from the audience that were directed at our speakers. So I hope we can keep the discussion going today. I also want to mention that we do have a hashtag. So if you want to post about the conference, you can use the hashtag Putting Language to Work, ou en français, c'est hashtag le langage au service de l'emploi. And don't forget to tag us as well so that we can respond. So we hope that today is informative for you. We hope that it is interesting, and we hope that it offers you some new perspectives. So without any delay, I'm going to pass it over to the moderator for our first panel, Nicholas Salter.
It's my pleasure to welcome you back to PERT's 3rd annual conference. This one, the theme is Putting Language to Work. So we're continuing with our 2nd day of the conference with our first panel, so Learning French for the Workforce in Quebec. Now, our research has shown that French is a key barrier to employment for English speakers in Quebec. This panel hopefully will explore the dimensions of learning French to participate in Quebec's labor market, including French language training, French in the workplace, and the roles of schools, employers, and community organizations. This builds upon our 2021 report assessing the state of French language workforce programs and examining how linguistic minorities access these type of skill training opportunities. As you're hopefully aware, in the last year, PERT has also completed 18 employment profiles looking at the state of employment for English speakers. Both our French language workforce program inventory report and those profiles raised many issues, but also solutions and recommendations. And really hope to continue that conversation today about solutions and recommendations and how we can push things forward. So we're excited to bring together leaders and learners who all bring to the table different approaches or different experiences, either in delivering French language training programs or in learning French for the workforce in Quebec. One thing to note about this panel is a bit different than yesterday. We have a couple Francophone guests with us as well, so we've invited them to respond in the language of their choice. And I'd like to begin by welcoming our panelists. So we have Andréane Gendron-Landry. So Andréane, I don't know if you want to give a wave, pedagogical advisor at the Cégep du Vieux-Montréal. We have Aki Chitakov, Executive Director of Yes Employment and Entrepreneurship. Hi there, Aki, nice to have you. We have Billy Walsh, Executive Director of l'Association des Sociétés de Développement Commercial de Montréal. And we also have Adam Hall, a French language learner. So that's going to be great mix of people. So we're going to ask the panelists now to introduce themselves in greater detail, but also with one question in mind to get things going. So that question is, and I'll do this one in both French and English. D'après votre expérience, quel est l'état de l'apprentissage du français chez les adultes au Québec? So from your experience, what is the state of French language learning for adults in Quebec? And Aki, it'll be over to you to answer the question first and introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Hello, my fellow panelists. Bonjour aux membres du panel. Ça me fait un plaisir de partager la scène un peu, si on peut dire ça avec vous. I am one of the founders of PERT. I'm very proud about that. And certainly I also sit on the board of PERT. Mon nom, c'est Aki Chitakov. Pour ceux qui ne me connaissent pas, je suis le directeur général de Yes Employment and Entrepreneurship. So Yes, for those who might not know us, has been around for 27 years. We're a nonprofit organization. Our mandate is to provide English support services to Quebecers, to help them find jobs, to help them start businesses. We work with the artist community, and we're known for our one-on-one programming, through our business coaching and our employment counseling. But we also do our work through workshops. We do our work through networking events, and many of you that are attending today have we had the pleasure of working together on this important work. Alors, juste pour vous donner une idée là, de l'ampleur de notre travail, l'année prochaine, nous avons desservi presque plus de 3000 clients. Et ensuite, on est connu là, pour nos services, et puis c'est une panoplie de services, que ce soit pour l'entremise là, du business coaching ou les conseils pour aider les gens à trouver d'emploi, les événements de réseautage. Mais bref, vraiment, on aimerait présenter à nos clients beaucoup de possibilités pour réussir au Québec, pour faire carrière au Québec et pour vraiment attirer du talent au Québec. Alors, pour la question qui nous préoccupe aujourd'hui, c'est la question là, du français. Et oui, je peux vous dire que on voit que l'état de l'apprentissage du français chez les adultes au Québec se porte très bien. Il y a de plus en plus de cours et d'étudiants qui veulent apprendre le français. So that's the good side of the coin, which is that the interest is there. And we're seeing that certainly our organization has always offered French as part of our services. We've upped it now in partnership, with RDN and with partnership with PERT. Now we offer, another higher level of French, which is really French for the workforce. That's the name of the program. And so people do want to integrate into Quebec. A lot of our clients come from outside of Quebec. So English is maybe sometimes their third language, and French is really down the list. But overall, they want to be able to find jobs. They want to be able to start their businesses. They want to integrate. So French language becomes a priority for them. there are some challenges, and the challenges are there's still gaps in accessibility and learning options, course availability. PERT did the report that Nick, you referenced that basically puts the spotlight on some of the shortcomings, especially in the regions of Quebec. There's issues around affordability. There's issues around flexibility in terms of times and schedules that allow people who are trying to make ends meet to also be able to participate in these types of classes after work hours. So and there's also a gap, and this is something that Yes brings to the table. There's also the gap around practical French for the employment for the job search for starting your career. So I'll stop there now. Is that okay, Nick? Am I okay for time? I don't want to. Yeah, I want to give everybody else a chance to also continue.
Yeah, obviously much to say, and we'll save that for later in the course of the panel. So thank you for that, Aki. Andréane, c'est à vous.
Bonjour tout le monde, je suis honorée d'être ici avec vous ce matin. Bonjour à tous les panélistes. Je suis conseillère pédagogique à la formation continue aux entreprises du Cégep du Vieux-Montréal. Je suis dans mes fonctions depuis environ 8 ans et pendant cette période, j'ai mis sur pied un centre linguistique dont la majorité des cours de français se font en ligne. Donc, l'objectif des cours de français, c'était d'aller rejoindre le plus de personnes possible à travers la province de Québec pour rendre accessible, bien entendu, les cours de français. Mais j'ai une double fonction, c'est de faire aussi du développement pédagogique pour des cours de français, de faire des designs, en fait, pour faire des formations le plus proche possible pour les entreprises, bien entendu, pour ceux qui veulent aider les employés à parler en français, mais aussi pour certains ministères ou certaines associations aussi. La question qui a été posée, c'est une question qui est vaste, qui est grande. On pourrait passer quand même un bon 20 minutes à en parler, justement, de la progression du français chez les adultes au Québec. Hier, j'étais au sommet de l'immigration, puis on parlait de l'état de l'apprentissage du français au Québec. Je vais vous donner quelques chiffres parce que les chiffres parlent. 37 000 personnes ont été francisées par le biais des cours du MIFI. Donc, les cours du ministère de l'Immigration, de la francisation et de l'intégration. On peut ajouter à ce chiffre-là, qui est peut-être entre 5 000 et 10 000 personnes qui ont suivi des cours de français à leurs propres frais. Donc, des cours qui se passent, par exemple, dans les centres linguistiques ou dans les écoles de langue ou dans les écoles privées, les universités. Donc, tous les gens qui sont intéressés justement à pouvoir obtenir un niveau de français. Mais par contre, il reste toujours un bassin de personnes qui ne peuvent pas rejoindre nécessairement des cours ou n'ont pas accès à des cours de français qui sont bien pour eux. Il y a plusieurs facteurs, comme disait Aki, justement, c'est l'accessibilité. L'accessibilité, le niveau des cours, par exemple, soit que les cours ne sont pas disponibles. Si, par exemple, les apprenants sont de niveau débutant, souvent, dans certaines régions du Québec, on ne va pas donner des cours de débutants, on va donner des cours d'intermédiaires. Ensuite, il y a toute la question de l'éloignement. Donc, dès le moment où on sort des grands centres comme Montréal ou Québec, ça devient de plus en plus difficile d'avoir des cours qui sont adaptés justement aux réalités des personnes qui sont en emploi, oui, mais des réalités qui sont en région aussi. Puis, il y a tout le côté des critères d'admissibilité. Donc, par exemple, pour l'instant, le ministère de l'Immigration, de la francisation et de l'intégration n'accepte pas les Canadiens d'origine, donc dans leur admissibilité, ce qui va changer probablement en 2023. Mais reste que tous les Québécois d'expression anglaise n'ont pas l'accès à ces cours gratuits du ministère de l'Immigration. Puis on parle aussi des communautés autochtones qui n'ont pas accès non plus à ces cours-là pour l'instant. Donc, mais il y a tous les critères d'admissibilité aussi dans les institutions. Tous les critères d'admissibilité dans les écoles de langue où on fait en sorte de rajouter toujours des processus administratifs. Donc, j'espère que j'aurais pu en parler longtemps, mais je vais clore là-dessus.
Okay, merci pour ça, Andréane. So Adam, it's over to you.
All right. Bonjour tout le monde. Je suis an étudiant de français, but I'm going to speak in English because it's much easier. So I represent ARC, Assistance and Referral Center in the Montérégie Centre area. We advocate for the English-speaking and Allophone community system in a variety of fields like health, education, whatever services they need, and then we refer people to different organizations. And I was asked to participate in this because I was a participant in the French for the Workforce course at YES, and I quite enjoyed it. I agree with everything that was said so far by Andréane and Aki. I think accessibility is a big one. I think people do want to learn French, and if for those of you who attended yesterday's conference, some of the messaging there that people come in with a lot of I remember hearing like McGill students, for example, come in with a lot of inspiration, and they want to get into it, and then you kind of you get in your little leash, your little group, and you fall by the wayside and start speaking your own language, and that's happened even to me somewhat. I moved here a year ago. I did study in Chicoutimi in the Saguenay 20 years ago in the Explore program and stayed the year. And then I went to France and studied some French and worked in French actually in Paris. But then 20 years, I come from British Columbia, and I lived in a variety of other countries, Turkey, Japan, Korea, Portugal, Sweden, and I never really used French. So I came back last year really enthusiastic, and it's been I work primarily in English, and I'm enthusiastic. It's just sometimes it is hard to really have that experience and that interaction in French. But I try every time I go anywhere. I try to use it. So I'll just try to represent myself as an English learner and answer any questions that people have for me. All right, Nick.
Thanks, Adam. I mean, your story is a great one. So, you know, that's what you're here to share. So thank you for being here. Billy, c'est à vous.
Hello, everyone. Je peux commencer par un bonjour hi, en fait, définitivement. My name is Billy Walsh. I'm the general manager of the ASDCM, what it is, l'Association des SDC de Montréal. And what's an SDC? For the one of you who are coming from, who has businesses in Canada, English side, it's like a BID or a BIA, so a business improvement district or a business improvement area. So une société de développement commercial represents their member, and their members are the merchant located on Commercial Street. So in Montreal, mostly major streets are associated as an SDC. And we do advocacy. We provide services to our members, and our members, the SDC, they do promotion, marketing, recruitment, scouting for newcomers, and also advocacy with their borough. So we try to enhance, humbly, we try to enhance the experience of a commercial street in Montreal, and this model of partnership between private and public sector is spread out all over North America and Europe as well. So for the question of a language factor in our field, a lot of things have been said. I would just say that we don't know really what's the I'm just looking for my the state of French language. Okay, I was looking back to your question, Nicolas. Sorry. We don't have data. We are spreading a program with the help of Cégep du Vieux-Montréal. It's a French classes inside the commerce with the team of the owner, the employees, Maybe Andréane is going to talk a little bit more about details with the program, but we're on site. And why did we accept that kind of program from the provincial minister is for the ASDCM, speaking another language is just another tool to do businesses. We wish that a lot of businesses can talk different languages, because for sure, when you can have this conversation with your clients, that gives you more leverage for your sales. So that was the mindset that we had when we accepted to develop this program. But there's another fact, because we're working on two levels. We're working with the merchant and their employees to improve their capacity to speak French, but also there's one data that really nous a étonné, which was the fact that dans les dernières années, we've realized that the people that have their mother language in French were not, when they were going to a commerce or a business, they were not asking to be served in French, but they were switching to the English right away because they had this contact in English with the tenant. And when we did this last publicity campaign in fall about using French in businesses, we really put on our vision of this campaign like it's an empathic campaign. And I'll switch in French to express myself and I'll go fast. Mais les gens qui arrivent sur les artères commerciales et qui ont comme langage souvent le deuxième langage, l'anglais, vont avoir une langue familière d'une autre origine. Ça peut être l'espagnol, ça peut être l'arabe ou autre. Quand les consommateurs viennent dans un commerce et commencent à parler en français avec les gens, inévitablement, c'est aussi une façon pour le consommateur d'inclure l'immigrant ou encore le tenancier du commerce à l'intérieur d'une communauté dans laquelle il fait des affaires et dans laquelle il vit. Et on a été très étonnés de voir ce résultat-là d'une étude qui disait que les consommateurs français switchaient ou changeaient de langage rapidement lorsqu'un entrepreneur n'était pas capable de lui parler en français. Donc, nous, ce qu'on a voulu faire à l'automne, c'est une campagne de publicité pour sensibiliser le consommateur et lui dire, quand tu rentres chez un commerce où la langue d'usage n'est peut-être pas le français, toi, en tant que consommateur et toi, en tant que francophone qui accueille l'entrepreneur, fais l'effort de lui parler en français et invite-le à apprendre davantage le français et à connaître le français et à aimer le français. Parce que pour nous, la responsabilité de parler français dans les commerces n'est pas seulement sur l'entrepreneur, mais bien sur les francophones, et eux aussi doivent faire le geste d'aller vers l'autre. Donc, on trouvait ça très important de travailler sur les deux points, soit l'apprentissage, mais en même temps la sensibilisation de la clientèle. Désolé, j'ai pris un peu de temps, je me suis étiré.
Non, mais c'est quand même important. Merci, Billy. Thanks, Billy.
You're welcome.
So I just have to mention for those our English guests that there is French to English interpretation as well. So you should be able to access the audio feed. If you're having any issues accessing that, please write to the team in the chat. But you should be able to get translation in either direction. So I hope that's working. I saw a comment in the chat, so I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of that. Now, as we go on, so we've kind of had the introductions from our panelists. That's great. What we're going to do next is we'll have some targeted questions to each of our guests, and then we'll ask the guests to respond. So the first person up is Aki. And so Aki, the question for you is, how might different demographics of English speakers have different needs when it comes to learning French for the workforce?
Well, there are many elements to this. Age, for example. So, young adults, they have different learning needs compared to older adults or people who are in a professional situation. Again, education, highly educated people, they have different learning needs versus people who might have lesser education. They might not have a post-secondary education. Employment, professional people, again, professional people, they have, what's important for them is to be able to function, at their level and be able to do meetings in French, be able to write professionally, send emails, and compared to somebody who's looking for that first job in Quebec, and they're more, they need to have a strong CV, they need to have a strong cover letter, they need to know, what the jargon is in the field that they're looking for. So you understand right there the variety. Income. Some people obviously don't have either the time or the financial means to be able to take advantage of courses that might be available to them. People who have families who need, in order to be able to participate in some of these courses, they need to have access to affordable childcare. And finally, la chose là qu'on va en discuter davantage, mais c'est toute la question là de où on est situé au Québec. Alors, comme nous, comme communauté, comme PERT l'a fait, c'est vraiment notre position, c'est qu'on aimerait que tous les Québécois aient accès à des opportunités pour apprendre le français. Peu importe là, combien de temps il se trouve au Québec, mais c'est vraiment d'ouvrir les portes et puis je pense que c'est quelque chose qu'on va aborder tantôt parce que c'est vraiment ça, c'était un point essentiel.
Thanks for that, Aki. So who would like to jump in here and respond and build on? Okay, Andréane.
Seulement pour rajouter sur les points d'Aki, parce que je pense qu'on a une connexion, on pense exactement la même chose. C'est surtout, oui, l'accessibilité, puis le fait d'être dans un grand centre comme Montréal qui amène les ressources en français plus facilement. Donc, il y a plus d'offres de cours, il y a plus de développement qui se fait, il y a plus de projets pilotes qui vont se passer à Montréal plutôt que des projets pilotes qui vont se faire en région. Moi, je pense que c'est important que toutes les SDC, les sociétés de développement économique des régions puissent en faire davantage aussi pour la population. Par exemple, en Estrie, où il y a une grande communauté de personnes québécoises d'expression anglophone, en Outaouais aussi. On parle aussi de certaines places dans le nord du Québec. Dans le nord du Québec, il y a toutes les populations autochtones, mais il y a aussi toute la capacité d'utiliser les ressources en ligne. Puis ça, c'est une problématique parce qu'il y en a qui sont très habiles avec le numérique, mais il y en a d'autres qui le sont moins. Puis ces gens-là aussi ont besoin de comprendre c'est quoi la compétence numérique. Donc, il y a cette petite chose-là, puis aussi l'intérêt personnel d'apprendre le français. L'intérêt, le goût de l'apprendre. Parce que peut-être aussi qu'il y a de la gêne, il y a de la timidité, il y a un refus peut-être aussi. Il y a peut-être aussi justement le temps. Le temps, c'est important quand on apprend une langue. Puis l'investissement, parce que c'est vraiment un investissement d'apprendre une langue. Puis il ne faut pas que ça devienne une obligation. Parce que quand l'apprentissage d'une langue devient une obligation, on tombe facilement en tant qu'apprenant de langue dans la frustration. Puis c'est là où on n'apprend plus. Donc, il faut que ça devienne quelque chose de plaisant, il faut que ça devienne une expérience intéressante et enrichissante.
Merci, Andréane. So perhaps Adam or Billy, you want to jump in here as well? Billy, c'est bon? Vous avez quelque chose à dire ou non?
I'm okay as well. I think that it was well covered, so I don't know what I could add.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're moving on here to Andréane. Donc, Andréane, quelles sont les préoccupations communes exprimées dans votre domaine? Comment ceux-ci peuvent-ils être abordés?
Encore une fois, c'est une question qui est vaste et qui pourrait prendre vraiment beaucoup de temps à répondre. Les préoccupations, je vous dirais, il y en a 4 grandes. Il y a l'argent. Bien entendu. L'argent, c'est qu'il y a certains apprenants qui n'ont pas les moyens nécessairement de se payer des cours de français. Que ce soit dans une école de langue privée, dans un centre linguistique, cégep, université, les cours peuvent varier de 300 $ à aller jusqu'à 750 $. Puis ça dépend si on n'est pas dans une université, qu'on ne suit pas un certificat en français langue seconde ou quelque chose comme ça. C'est sûr qu'il y a toujours les organismes communautaires, mais quand on arrive dans les organismes communautaires, on n'est pas sûr d'avoir nécessairement le niveau adéquat ou d'avoir la possibilité d'avoir un cours qui va en corrélation avec le niveau de compétence qu'on a. L'autre chose aussi, c'est le temps. OK, ben, justement, comme disait Aki, il y a une conciliation, travail, famille, études. Les gens qui arrivent ici au Québec, puis les gens qui sont au Québec ont un travail probablement, ont des familles, vont peut-être aux études. Essayer de faire en sorte de lier tout ça et d'apprendre le français en plus, ça peut devenir une surcharge. Puis ça peut être un petit peu, pas un petit peu, un énorme frein à l'apprentissage. Le troisième point, ce serait la reconnaissance des institutions. C'est beau d'apprendre le français, okay? C'est bien d'apprendre le français. Maintenant, il faudrait peut-être que l'ensemble des institutions, autant scolaires que gouvernementales, qui disent, ben, écoutez, on va reconnaître tous les cours ou les cours de français ou l'effort d'apprendre le français en disant, ben, on va donner une reconnaissance, un papier qui va dire, vous avez tel niveau en français, puis d'uniformiser tout ça. Puis je vais revenir avec mes pistes de solutions. Puis, l'autre chose aussi, ce qui me tient beaucoup à cœur, c'est le design des cours. Comment les cours sont montés, comment les programmes sont faits. Je ne dirais pas qu'on n'est pas dans une nouvelle mouvance, mais il y a toujours la conception et la construction des cours qui sont souvent et restent souvent traditionnels, où l'apprenant est plus un auditeur qu'un participant. Puis, plus tu as un étudiant qui participe dans son cours, qui met en place qui active sa langue, qui met en place sa langue, plus il va retirer des avantages puis des bénéfices. De tout ça, il y a des pistes de solutions. Je pense qu'il faudrait avoir plus de subventions gouvernementales, bien entendu, oui, mais aussi de rendre peut-être un peu plus accessibles les cours au niveau des centres linguistiques, des écoles de langue, tout ça. Oui, on a besoin du profit, mais est-ce qu'on peut aussi penser aux facteurs humains? Moi, c'est ce que je me dis. À un moment donné, il faut que l'équation facteur humain rentre en ligne de compte. Il faut être peut-être un petit peu plus souple aussi en tant qu'organisation ou personnes qui donnons les cours, de mettre plus de souplesse dans les cours, puis d'accompagner les étudiants. Parce que la réussite d'apprentissage, c'est d'accompagner les gens aussi pour qu'ils sentent qu'on les appuie, qu'on est là pour eux, qu'on est là pour les amener à atteindre leur objectif. Diminuer les processus et les évaluations linguistiques d'admissibilité dans un programme, dans un autre programme, essayer d'harmoniser le tout pour rendre les choses plus fluides, c'est comme un petit peu rentrer dans un labyrinthe. Puis là, je parle de peu importe où on applique, il va toujours avoir une évaluation linguistique. Donc, peut-être d'essayer d'harmoniser les choses. C'est sûr que c'est un petit peu peut-être utopique, mais moi, je pense qu'à un moment donné, tout le monde peut travailler ensemble en collégialité. Puis, il y a aussi de créer des cours souples, adaptatifs, qui sont modulables, qui mettent l'apprenant au milieu de son apprentissage, en recentrant le cours sur les besoins. C'est pas vrai qu'un cours est carré. Un cours est supposé être souple, être fluide, pouvoir s'adapter justement aux apprenants. Puis ça, c'est un vecteur de réussite dans l'apprentissage d'une langue.
Merci. La passion est clairement là. So a lot to say, absolutely right, but very well said. So thank you for that. And the human element in all this seems to be a theme I'm hearing from all of you. Does anyone like to add anything to Andriane's comments? Aki, Billy, Adam?
Yeah, maybe just, bring in the perspective, of the English-speaking community from our standpoint. Je suis tout à fait d'accord avec Andriane et puis l'approche qu'elle propose, surtout l'idée de harmonisation puis l'idée de partenariat. Nous, on est là. On privilège cette approche-là. Merci, Andriane. Je voulais juste aborder ça du point de vue de nos clients, les gens d'expression anglaise. So as most of us know, there's a lot of insecurity. That's very fundamental for the people, that we work with and who are trying to build their lives in Quebec. We know the famous self-select where we have, young university graduates, who are able to get by in French. The French might not be, super fluent, but they have enough French to be able to apply for a lot of the positions that are posted, but they won't because they don't have confidence in their French. And that's really a shame. So we have, that challenge. We have also the challenge of how do you do an interview in French? And I think I'm speaking for most of us. We've been in that chair. I certainly have been in that chair. And, we need to have confidence in the interview. We find ourselves, we think that we're not using the right vocabulary. We're not confident in the way we're presenting ourselves. So one of the things that we're doing, obviously, which is obvious, is really do a lot of interview simulations. So people can actually practice, how to do an interview in French. Another reality is learning disabilities and people that need to learn in different ways, and that we need professional development for our instructors and our teachers. Refugees, there's the challenge of unresolved trauma. So you have people who are coming here under very difficult circumstances, who have to deal with adapting to a new society. There's also unresolved trauma, because they're coming from a war situation. We saw that, with Syrians. We're seeing it with Ukrainians, and this has to be taken, into consideration when we're looking at expectations for how long is it going to take for this population to learn French and to be comfortable in French. And it's not, in the time frame that the government has presented of 6 months. I mean, that's absolutely, it just does not make sense on the ground. We have to, so our curriculums, our teachers, need to be trained to be able to help, people that are grappling with unresolved trauma. And of course, work in partnership with community organizations that are doing good work, working with these populations. Just put on my employment hat. I mean, the important goal here is for people to be able to learn a level of French that's going to help them in their job search. And I remind the conference that, in terms of unemployment levels, the English-speaking community has higher unemployment levels than the French-speaking community. And we also see that we have, our community has a higher level of people that are below the low-income line than is the case with our French counterparts. So those are the issues that we see that we deal with. And it's very important for us to be able to also open the doors to certain sectors. Let's take, of course, la fonction publique québécoise. On sait là que notre communauté, les gens d'expression anglaise sont vraiment sous-représentés dans la fonction publique québécoise. Ça, c'est un grand enjeu. Nous tous, on a abordé cet enjeu, mais il faut vraiment le souligner parce que c'est pas seulement dans la fonction publique, il y a d'autres secteurs où il y a un travail à faire pour vraiment ouvrir les portes aux professionnels qui sont formés à l'étranger, par exemple. On connaît toutes ces dynamiques-là. Alors, et finalement, c'est comme une perception aussi que ailleurs au Canada, les gens qui sont multilingues sont un peu plus sont plus accueillis qu'au Québec. Alors, peut-être quelqu'un qui est multilingue, puis le français, c'est la langue la plus faible, cette personne a la tendance de se sentir comme un peu là, c'est difficile, c'est plus difficile ici au Québec qu'en Ontario, par exemple. Ça, c'est des anecdotes, on peut en parler. Et finalement, je vais juste dire un mot là sur la loi 96. Et c'est le message que cette loi, c'est dommage, c'est comme Andréane l'avait dit là, l'expérience d'apprendre le français, ça doit être vraiment une expérience agréable. C'est important de motiver les gens. Et c'est pas ça le message chez les gens qu'on voit, la loi 96, c'est pas perçu comme ça. Alors vraiment là, il faut vraiment aborder ça. Et le message, c'est comme, on va pas le faire plus facile pour toi à apprendre le français. Ce qu'on va faire, c'est vraiment là, on va te punir parce que ton français n'est pas adéquat. Alors ça, il faut vraiment regarder ce message et puis il y a un débat à avoir là-dessus.
Merci, Aki. Thank you for your comments. Adam or Billy, do you want to jump on and respond to what you've heard from Andréane or Aki on this question? We're good? Okay, I'll take your silence.
Non, mais je pourrais peut-être ajouter que justement ce que dit acquis, en fait, je pense qu'il y a une grande part de responsabilité des francophones envers les allophones ou encore les anglophones pour faire en sorte que justement, ça ne soit pas, comme vous disiez, perçu comme quelque chose d'obligatoire, mais comme quelque chose d'inclusif. Et c'est un peu ce que je mentionnais dans ma première intervention, c'est qu'on essaie de travailler sur deux volets. Le deuxième volet, c'est faire en sorte que les francophones, quand ils se retrouvent dans une situation où quelqu'un en avant d'eux parle en anglais, on aime ça. To switch in English, we love it because it gives us the opportunity to practice. But it's a really selfish behavior. So if we want to be inclusive and if we want to bring those people in our community, we have to make the effort of speaking in French with them and go with their speed, go with their flow, and pas à pas, I think those people are going to feel more included. That's our mindset with the program that I'm going to talk about later on.
J'avoue, à toutes les occasions que je parle en français dans la rue, puis quelqu'un fait le switch, je suis tellement déçu, like, oh man, they heard my accent. They know I'm not a native speaker, so it's always thank you for that.
I was in South America when I was 21 years old, and I've learned, like, I did 2 or 3 classes in university in Spanish, and when I was talking to them, people just realized that I was not a Spanish speaker. And they could have the reflex of switching right to the English because I was a tourist and they wanted to go it faster and easier for me. But it's not the way, because if you want to include people in your community, you have to go with their flow, you have to go with their speed, and just, I think, reward their effort by include them in your language.
Thank you for that. And I think this is actually a perfect segue into the next question, which is for Adam, so we can bring in the experience of someone trying to learn the language. And just a reminder, I believe we were maybe not clear off the top that there is interpretation in both languages, and you can access that in the interpretation tab. So that is now available in both languages for those who are having trouble following along and switching. I know we're switching between English and French a lot there, but you should be able to get a feed just in English or just in French with the original audio or not, and turn that on or off. So again, if you don't know how to do that, please reach out to the team in the chat. So Adam, yeah, as a French language learner, we've heard from a lot of people delivering programs and being involved in helping people learn, but we'd love to hear from you in terms of your experience. More generally, you can kind of respond to what you've heard so far, but also kind of gaps between the theory and then the actual practice when it comes to French language learning.
All right. Yeah. So the obvious one that I think a lot of people already know is we learn metropolitan French, right? Or like formal French in Quebec. Like I think that's what the answer most people are expecting, right? We learn the French from France and most countries in the world, and Quebec is tough because there's the street French, as you mentioned, and then there's the formal French, right? And I think people run into issues with that, including myself. I was lucky to start in Chicoutimi, of all places, right? And I chose that because I knew at that time, 20 years ago, like this is coming out of that referendum, and I knew it would be a pretty isolating experience where it'd be forced to speak French. I chose it over Montreal, but I did find it easier somewhat when I was in Paris in France to communicate with the French that I had learned in school. I found the language easier to process than some of the slang of Quebec. So that's me personally speaking, and still to a certain extent. Another thing, like to follow up on what Billy was saying, and I think a couple of you touched on it, is the people that I think they do it to be nice. And at least where I live on the South Shore right now, very much so in Montreal, I noticed more than when I was in Quebec 20 years ago, people are very bilingual, trilingual, quadrilingual, whatever, but most people speak English to a certain extent, even though they'll say I'm not very good at English, and and they try to switch, and I think it's with good intentions, but it actually has a negative effect, including myself, because it's too easy. It's too easy, like Billy would say, it's too easy for me to switch to English. Now, my wife is a native Spanish speaker, and she speaks English fluently, and her French is quite good, but she doesn't run into the same problems as me, because when Quebec Francophones speak with her, they don't hear that accent, right? So they're hesitant to switch. She'll sometimes ask for clarification in English because she doesn't always understand in French, but very rarely will people switch to English with her, which I think it helps her to improve, right? And I know people are being nice, but last night I went to the pharmacy and j'ai commencé en français. Mon français, c'est pas parfait, mais je peux parler en français. Je peux demander quelque chose en français. But the woman switched automatically to English, and she always answered me in English, right? And I stayed with my French, just pour niaiserie. No, I just stayed with it just to, why not, right? But she didn't do it to put me down. She was trying to assist me, right? But I think if I could say something to Quebecois who voted for the government that pushed Bill 96, try to speak with people in French. And I agree with Billy. Be empathetic, because it's hard to learn. And a lot of Quebecois have traveled, right? Go surrounded by English-speaking countries. It's hard, right? And it takes time, but maybe you can help people with a word here and there. I think, as speaking as a generalization, of course, the Anglo community, at least not in Quebec, but in other parts, like growing up in the Vancouver area, we're very used to being patient and adapting to people who don't have English as a mother tongue, and we're extremely patient with that, because like just growing up, you have to, because where I was living recently, Richmond, BC, I think there were probably more people who don't have English as a mother tongue than do, right, who live there now. So, but I think other countries, like my wife's from Mexico, living in Mexico for a while, Quebec, people are less patient, and it's not, again, it's I don't mean it's not intentionally to be mean or cruel. It's just we're not used to it, or well, I'm not from Quebec, so people, French speakers or Spanish speakers in Mexico, or say in Japan. When I was in Japan, people aren't used to hearing another language as much. So I think patience, but yeah, the metropolitan French somehow to get that Quebec street slang, because it throws people off, but that's really needed. And I think to kind of speak onto what Adrian and Aki were talking about, as a language learner, I heard you guys mention this, I think it's hard. You need that interaction, you need that face-to-face, you need that communication. And yes, job interviews and that, it's good to have those mock interviews, but I think to be conversational really gives confidence, right? So maybe smaller classes. I know it's funding and logistics. I get it, all that. But in an ideal world, more one-on-one with people who speak French, more common language, because I think that helps build confidence in an interview, not just memorizing some words and phrases. And I don't mean that's what Yes does. I don't want to give a negative. It was a good course. In an ideal world, that's it, though. Having learned other languages, because I studied in Germany and places like that as well, you gain so much confidence with the regular language. And then the formal book language can build on top of that, rather than the other way around, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
We'll give other people a chance to jump in here. Adam's experience, but thanks for that, Adam. So, Andriane, oui.
C'est tellement c'est tellement vrai.
So it's really true what you said. So it's true that Quebecers they switch.
Parce qu'on entend un accent, parce qu'on ne laisse pas la chance peut-être à la personne qui est de vraiment parler. Ce que j'ai dit souvent à mes étudiants, parce que j'ai enseigné, ce que je dis souvent à tous les personnes qui parlent en français, c'est même si la personne te parle en anglais, continue en français. C'est l'autre personne qui va être un petit peu bizarre à te parler en anglais quand tu continues en français. Mais je comprends aussi, c'est plus facile. C'est plus facile de tous les côtés. Mais toi, ton objectif, c'est quoi? C'est de parler en français. Mais bon, toujours est-il que ça prend de la volonté. Ça prend de la volonté de faire ça. C'est un commitment. Okay? Pourquoi je ne le fais pas en anglais aujourd'hui? Okay? Parce que justement, je suis gênée. Parce que je parle en anglais. Mais devant 66 personnes, oui, je suis vraiment gênée. Okay? Puis pour moi, ça serait un commitment. Pour moi, j'aurais besoin de faire des mock situations in English. Okay? Puis c'est vraiment je dirais qu'il faut que les institutions, les centres de langue, les programmes, les organismes communautaires, les gouvernements, tous les paliers se mettent ensemble, OK, pour justement alléger ce fardeau-là, OK, de rendre les choses un petit peu transparentes. Peut-être que c'est de la culture francophone, anglophone. C'est peut-être, tu sais, on parle souvent des deux solitudes, OK, mais peut-être que c'est pas vraiment deux solitudes, qu'il faut juste qu'on soit capable de se réunir puis de parler ensemble, tout simplement. Que ça soit à moitié en anglais, à moitié en français. J'en ai des amis anglophones, puis on fait le switch anglais-français. Il y a la moitié des mots que je dis en français, la moitié des mots, il le dit en anglais, mais on est capable de communiquer. Puis je pense que la base, c'est la communication. Puis l'important, c'est qu'on soit capable de s'entendre, de se comprendre. C'est ce que j'avais à dire.
Merci, merci Andréane. Aki, Billy, est-ce que vous avez des choses à ajouter ici? Anything to add? Okay. Oh, Billy.
I just want to say one more time, I think the key word for my understanding of the situation, my key word is empathy for the French speaker. When you see someone like Adam starting to try and to jump in, having the confidence of starting a conversation in French, don't switch in English. I know, Quebecers, you want to switch in English because you want to improve your English. You're part of North America. You're surrounded by 300 millions of English people speaking. You want to be part of it as well, but accept the one in your community that do the steps. You know, French, we're 8 million. We do not in economic issue. We're not representing a big market for maybe job promotion. You know, when you're Canadian, you have a country of 30 million people and job opportunity. But when you're in Quebec, when you're in Montreal, when someone does the effort, go on and keep your selfish. I will say it like that. Keep your selfish attitude of speaking English and practicing and having some fun with switching language for yourself. Go and embrace the move that someone in front of you does, is vulnerable, he goes on, go with the flow and dance with him, please.
Yeah. Just very quickly, I'd just like to add to Billy's point. I mean, part of this is also, and I give full credit to our French-speaking entrepreneurs. They provide good customer service. There's a reflex there to provide good customer service. The customer the French is not their first language. They're more comfortable in English. I can also understand that, and it's just good business sense. And I think that's also part of this.
Thanks for that, Aki. Well, we've talked a lot about French language learning and the various challenges and the empathy that's needed, and some of the other kind of developments that are needed in terms of delivery of these programs. But Billy and his organization is actually delivering French language training on the ground in a series of businesses, and I'd like us to move there to the employment and the practical kind of programs that Billy and his team is developing. So I'm leading a bit with my segue here. But Billy, has your organization implemented any useful solutions for French language learning for the workforce? And if so, what are the takeaways from some of those initiatives?
We already started this program in fall with the collaboration of Cégep du Vieux-Montréal, and Adrian is really a part of this big success. We got a mandate from the ministère, le SPVLF, le MLF, actually. And they ask us, how can we try to improve, to help, to work the French issue in Montreal in businesses? Because they did not say that, but I think that was all in our mind. We did a lot of front pages for the last years, for the last decade, about the fact of commerce in English downtown Montreal. So, okay, what do we do about it? How can we bring those people, and I want to say customer and workers as well, to a point where they can have conversation in French, both of them. So we as I said earlier, we worked on two levels. The first one was with the tenant and the employees. I'll be back there. And the second one was also to convince the French customer when they go inside of a businesses and the owner or the employee starts to speak in French or barely speak in French, don't switch to the English. Go on, dance with him. So I'll be back. I come back to the classes. So we started 3 different programs. The first one is a program called Image-FR. This program helps tenant and commerces to transform their marketing and commercial tools from the English to the French. Yes, there's a bill. Yeah, there's a law. They have to be. They have to conform themselves to a certain points with the sign and all that stuff. So we help them to go to the next step. So we provide them the files, and then they are responsible for the cost and for the action as well to produce those tools. So we're talking about menus, signs, outside signs, everything that goes inside of their businesses or outside of their businesses that has to be not confirmed, but conformé with the French laws. Second point is the language factor. So with the collaboration of Cégep du Vieux-Montréal, we created an application called Dialogue-FR. So you can find it, it's free. You can find it on Apple and Google as well. And this application is directly is focusing on the restaurant workforce. And you're going to find all the vocabulary you need to have a basic conversation in French with your customers. And we will go on, if we have more funds, we will go on with sectors of activities like that, because it's really technical, it's business oriented. Let me just tell you an example. I go in a restaurant in Montreal. I am a French speaker. I cannot speak in English. I have some problems to express myself, but I'm allergic to peanuts. I'm allergic to whatever it is. I need to have this conversation with the tenant, with the entrepreneur, to make sure that my life is not in danger. So this situation or this case study is really like, let's say it's a caricature, but we are, with this application, giving the tenant and the businesses and the employees the first step to understand French in a way that it's going to help their business. It's going to help their sales. And we're going to have, with this application, do it. We're going to have to do it with different type of businesses. Maybe it's going to be hairdresser, maybe it's going to be for retail, but next step is going to be to specify or to focus on certain type of let's say commerce field. And the last device or service we produced is a classes right in the business. So 10 hours classes with all the employees, really flexible, really oriented on their work, really oriented on their reality. This program has been produced and thought by the Cégep du Vieux-Montréal as well. Andréane is a key factor to the success of this program. And actually, we have almost like 45 businesses that are subscribed to this program. And we're on-site, flexible, and we adapt ourselves to the reality of the businesses. So basically, in resume, let's say three options or 3 services: Image-FR, Dialogue-FR, that comes in 2 parts, the application and the classes right in the middle of the workplace.
Thanks for that, Billy. And I'm just going to tell the audience that we're still aiming to end at 10:45. I've got a couple questions myself, and I know that perhaps the panelists want to respond, but if you have questions, get them in there. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going with my questions. So now's your time to get your questions into the Q&A box. And I'm going to permit myself to ask Billy 2 follow-up questions before we open to the rest of the floor, the rest of the panelists. So the first is just, could you maybe tell us about the incentives for the businesses? Like, are the businesses that you're working with, are they kind of paying their employees to learn on the job? Or are you compensating them for the time? Could you just tell me a bit how that works?
Well, I don't know if those employees are paid during the session. I hope so, and I think so, but Andréane can answer maybe better than I can do. And this program is free and provided by the Association of the SDC of Montreal.
So, Andréane, do you want to jump in here, peut-être me donner une réponse à cette question-là? Ouais.
Oui, en fait, les employés qui sont intéressés à apprendre le français sur leur lieu de travail doivent être pendant le moment où ils sont au travail. Donc, le propriétaire ou le gérant qui permet à l'employé de suivre 1 heure de formation qui va être, bon, l'employé est payé, bien entendu, par leur employeur, mais le formateur est payé justement par la subvention de la SDCM, tout ça. Donc, ça reste des cours qui sont très souples, très... on a conçu des fiches pédagogiques qui vont répondre justement à des questions très simples, mais au-delà du vocabulaire, au-delà de la grammaire, au-delà de la syntaxe, on est vraiment, vraiment dans la communication. On est dans les mises en situation, on est vraiment dans le commerce, dans le restaurant de la personne qui est là où il travaille jour après jour, puis on parle de leur menu, de leur fonction à l'intérieur du restaurant, que tu sois un cuisinier, un serveur, au comptoir, on passe à travers presque toutes les sphères, puis on va même au-delà parce que les formateurs, je les ai formés, on a conçu le matériel ensemble, ils savent exactement où on s'en va, puis ils sont capables justement d'adapter les contenus selon les besoins des étudiants. C'est pour ça que je vous dis, plus les formations sont souples, plus on est capable de répondre aux besoins des gens. Puis la SDCM, c'est toujours un plaisir que de travailler avec la SDCM. Puis je pense qu'on a fait quelque chose d'assez intéressant. Donc, allez voir justement l'application Dialogue FR. C'est quand même plaisant s'amuser à écouter les choses qu'il y a dessus.
Merci. Donc, si j'ai bien compris, if I understood correctly, the employer absorbs the costs of their kind of employees' regular hourly wage. They see the advantage of the training. The training is offered for free. That's correct. Okay, perfect. Billy, the other question I had for you was related to kind of the changing, perhaps it's affected by the labor shortage, but are the businesses that you work with seeing that accessing kind of maternal francophones on the front lines in their jobs more and more difficult? Like, is the type of employee they're hiring at the retail or restaurant level changing, and the need to have kind of French language training integrated in the workplace is becoming more and more important, or were there other reasons or rationale that you kind of move forward with this initiative?
That's a good question. There's a lot of motivation from them. We did not do the survey to understand what's their motivation. Why do they jump in that kind of program? But with the experience and with the chat I had with my team on the ground, I might say that maybe there's 3 factors that make them move towards French. Economic factor, be part of a community, because all the SDC we're working with are French user in their communication, in their Assemblée Générale, in their, let's say, networking sessions. So those people, maybe they want to be part of a wider business community instead of being with their welcoming community, if they are a foreign language instead of English. And I would say that maybe those people are also aware about Bill 96, Bill 101, and maybe I should start to do something because I know that this exists, and I don't want to be I want to be not maybe part of it, but when we talk about someone said it, I think it's Aki, having a law maybe can fear people. So maybe they're acting also on this trigger. I hope not. I hope it's going to be for the 2 first one, be part of a community and improve their business. But it's a good question, and maybe it's going to be part of our survey at the end of the program that finishes in March. But hopefully, we're going to have a new wave, and we'll be able to provide those services to our businesses in Montreal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, keep us in the loop about that. We'd love to hear it. Certainly, our research shows that retail and those kind of frontline jobs are jobs that English speakers occupy nonetheless. And if they have challenges in learning French, or having French skills, and it's always important to ensure they can improve French skills in the workplace. So we're very interested in that issue. So keep us in the loop.
Yeah, no problem.
We have about 5 minutes left. I see one question from the audience from Jacqueline, so I'm going to get to that. But I'd love to hear from Aki and Adam. I know that you also have a program. We've touched on that a little bit, but if Aki, you could maybe give us a little more details and say about a minute or two about the work that you're doing at Yes. Perhaps bringing in also the work with RDN, and then Adam, I just want to hear from you a minute or two about kind of your experience as someone arriving here. Clearly, you have some background in French, but what it was like to kind of search for programs and also kind of try to learn in the workforce.
Yeah. So and Adam, it's so wonderful to have you on the same panel, right? I mean, we complement our presentations so well. So French for the workforce. This is basically our key French program right now. And as I said, yes, it's about helping people to navigate the job search and building that confidence, so you can apply for those positions that require a high level of bilingualism. So that, but even you feel better as a citizen of Quebec, and you do see your future in Quebec. So it fundamentally, it's about being practical. And as we discussed, there's the academic French and the school taught French, but then there's the French that we need that's more practical in order to be able to understand job postings, in order to be able to do your interview, in order to be able to have your elevator pitch. And that's part of it. The other part of it is, and this is where the partnership with RDN, the Regional Development Network, is so important. It's also about people who work in the community sector, who are supporting the community, who are interacting with government. For those people, for those leaders in our community, also for them an opportunity to up their French, so they can do a better job in the services that they're providing to the community. But also for somebody as well, there's work to be done for that population that does have a job, that is building their career, but that would like to go further in Quebec, and give them the opportunity, to improve their French. So it all comes back to the core principles that Andriane and Billy and I look forward. Vraiment, j'ai hâte de continuer cette discussion avec vous. C'est vraiment très encourageant, les initiatives que vous avez mises en place. Je vous vraiment félicite parce que je vois la complémentarité avec notre travail puis nos clients qui vont sortir de nos services, mais qui veulent continuer leur parcours. Surtout là, s'ils sont intéressés à devenir des entrepreneurs. Cet élément-là, Billy, le programme que vous proposez, ça peut être très intéressant, et puis c'est comme des ressources additionnelles que nous, on peut partager avec notre monde. Et ça, c'est très, très valeureux. So all to say, the core principles, adaptable programming that has empathy, that's delivered with empathy. Bridge building, these are the core principles. These are, the pillars that we should be building on that will advance the learning of French. And my final comment is, in terms of our program, we also have the advantage of having, a great teacher, Louis Lutiec, who is a Québécois de souche, mais qui a l'expérience, qui connaît très bien notre monde, et puis qui s'attend très bien, qui comprend les différentes réalités là des gens. Et qui adapte son programme à ces gens-là. Parce qu'on met l'emphase sur un parcours qui va continuer pour la personne et qui va être vraiment avantageux pour tout le monde, pour l'individu, mais ainsi que pour le Québec.
Thanks for that, Aki. Billy, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I just want to add something to the conversation because we're working with the businesses, and I don't know from which field of work people that are in the conference come from, but there's a reality actually in many businesses, but specifically in street commerces, street businesses, they're facing a lot of challenges. They're facing a challenge of inflation. They're facing a challenge of raise for the rent in Montreal. It's not new. You heard about it for the last years. They're challenging a multiplication of the communication platform in their own business. Before, you had to put on a publicity or advertising in the local newspaper or a local radio station. Actually, you have to be really performing on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is, and also to have a nice showcase. And there's a multiplication of the platform and the contact point to reach out your customers. Then they're asking you to go on e-commerce because you have to do business there as well. And you're facing a crisis of employees because you cannot find people working in your own commerce. So you do 60, 70, 75 hours to keep your dream, your commerce open. If we have the language factor and it's an obligation, people are not going to go there. They're going to resist because they know that they can still do business in English. It runs for sure. But if they have French, it's a new tool to do more businesses for themselves. It has to be fun. It has to be flexible. It has to be cool. We have to give the tenant, the employees, the will to go further. And that's our role and that's our objective right now. If they want to go further, we're going to provide them new classes. But I think the approach is really important because businesses actually door to door, moms and pop shop, they're facing a lot of issues and challenges. And French has to be cool.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for jumping in there, Billy. We are slightly over time. I'm going to let us go to 11 because I'd like to answer Jacqueline's question. If someone can answer Jacqueline's question, I'll give it to one of you to respond. And then I'd love to hear, Adam, you just kind of give us your final thoughts on kind of the experience of being a French language learner coming from abroad from the rest of Canada. So Andréane, the question, or I don't know if it's going to be you who's going to answer, but Jacqueline, their organization is funding partners providing second language conversation cafes, mentorship workshops, online language exchange partners to supplement formal language training. Thoughts on this strategy, and do you know of available resources, guidelines for these informal language acquisition activities? J'imagine que c'est toi, Andréane, mais si quelqu'un d'autre veut répondre, ils peuvent aussi.
Je peux commencer, il n'y a pas de problème. Il y a beaucoup de ressources, en fait, qui sont à la disposition. J'en nomme quelques-unes des ressources, mais je pourrais peut-être faire parvenir aux organisateurs de PERT une espèce de webographie ou de link Internet qui pourrait, ou peut-être seulement on pourrait être en communication, Madame Vachon, si vous voulez. On a une grosse portion qui est de vocabulaire qui nous sont offerts par l'Office québécois de la langue française, qui ont vraiment des listes de vocabulaire explicatives, des exercices aussi sur les métiers au Québec. Ensuite, par exemple, les infirmiers, le génie, l'informatique, on peut continuer. Tu as tout référence francisation, une partie est accessible en ligne et gratuite. Il y a aussi tout ce qui est fait par le CCDMD, qui est le Centre collégial de matériel didactique, où il y a il y a vraiment une grosse... il y a plein d'activités pédagogiques, d'exercices, puis j'en passe, il y en a vraiment beaucoup. Puis je pense qu'en fait, quand on est un organisme ou une organisation, il faut vraiment... Il faut peut-être aller voir aussi puis qu'on veut monter son propre matériel aussi. Peut-être aller voir dans les benchmarks, dans les compétences essentielles. C'est à partir des compétences essentielles qu'on a monté d'ailleurs le dialogue FR, cette formation, parce qu'on va vraiment aller chercher ce que les gens ont besoin finalement. Donc, allez voir dans le Benchmark Canada. Allez voir aussi dans l'échelle québécoise des compétences en français des adultes. Il y a une quantité de ressources pour être en mesure de produire du matériel, il y en a déjà qui sont produits, puis il y en a qu'on peut justement adapter à notre secteur d'activité. Mais ça aussi, c'est une longue discussion, puis ça me ferait plaisir de partager.
Merci, Andréane. Well, we're going to take you up on that offer. We're going to get that web infographie que tu as mentionné, puis on va trouver une manière de la mettre sur notre site ou partager avec tout le monde. Adam.
All right. So just to close it out, I wanted to say to Aki again, I did like the course, and I already expressed what I think could be improved. I think Louis is excellent, by the way. I agree. He's an awesome teacher. So I recommend it to anybody, because you have insecurities about CVs and you know, cover letters and interviews, because every culture is a little bit different, even though we're in the same country. So I think those were really positive things. I also agree with Billy. I think it needs to be made fun. People need to feel included, right? And sometimes there's everyone knows the labels like Anglophone, Francophone, and I think just encouraging people to interact more. We moved here, my wife and I, with our baby, who's now 20 months, we moved here for him to learn French and for ourselves, right? My wife really loves the French language. She studied for 4 years in university. I had my experience from before. So we came here. I don't want to talk too much politics too, because I mean, you never talk politics, right? Or what is it? Politics of religion. But the Bill 96 did put me off, to be honest, as an Anglophone, from an interprovincial Anglophone who migrated over here. I found it forceful. Like I do love French, and I really enjoyed my time in Quebec when I was here. And every time I visited, I've close friends who are Francophone here. And yeah, I just I feel that I kind of agree with Billy. I think there's got to be a better approach to encourage people. There's a Aesop's fable with the sun and the wind and the man with the coat. You probably all know it, right? Or the wind blows it and the sun heats it and the man removes his coat. I agree with the sun. I think you guys know the fable. I won't go into it too much, but I think that's a nice approach to language. Anyway, I appreciate. Hey,
we're into the fable territory now.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good
Anyway,
way to end. Yeah. But thank you for sharing your experience. Billy.
Thanks
What I've heard from everyone is that they're real people trying to learn language who move here because they love the French language, that having an approach centered on them that's flexible, that takes into account that reality, that approaches them with empathy is so important. That's what I've heard from all of you. I know we can probably keep this discussion going. I know I'm over time. I want to give people a chance for a bathroom break, grab another coffee, a tea, whatever their fancy, perhaps smoothie. So I'm going to have to end the panel, but I wanted to thank Andréane. Merci beaucoup, Andréane. Merci beaucoup, Billy. Thank you so much, Aki, and thank you, Adam, for your time. And thank you to the attendees for being generous with us and letting us going a bit over. We're going to be back on in 7 minutes. So with a panel on French and Quebec's professional orders. So the discussion will continue about language learning, this time looking more specifically at professional orders and the barriers for people to join the professional orders. It's going to be a great panel. So thank you to everyone again, and looking forward to seeing at least some of you very shortly.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. And we will be starting shortly this next panel on English for professionals in the professional orders. With this being said, I would like to take a few moments to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is André Rousseau. I am the Executive Director of Cible Retour à l'Emploi, an employment organization, a non-for-profit, which provides employability services in both French and English to the population of job searchers in the Montreal area. We have been doing so for the last 20-odd years, and I have been the acting ED of that organization for that long as well. I also hold the chair position of the employment sectoral table, one of 4 sectoral tables, which provides information and useful data to PERT for its ongoing mission. And I will also try to refrain myself from translating and saying all that I've just mentioned in both French and English. As you have probably already heard, this entire session is being recorded, and it is also providing simultaneous interpretation for either French or English native speakers, so that you may follow the discussion in either language that you prefer. This being said, I would also remind the audience that you may forward all of your questions as you go along, but using strictly the Q&A box, because the chat box will not be used for this purpose, and questions will be answered at the end only, amongst a few that will be selected due to time constraints only. For our panelists, I also remind you that there is simultaneous translation, and therefore, would you please speak slowly and articulate as best you can for our translators to make it easier on them and make sure we have good and appropriate translation for our audience. Thank you very much for complying with this. And I will also signal you when your time is up by raising my hand this way and not the electronic way, because it's easier for me. And due to my old age, I think I will avoid technological problems. This being said, I am very pleased right now to introduce to the audience our current panel. We first have our first speaker, which will speak of how to improve French in the professional orders. We have Heather Hallman. So Heather, may you take a couple minutes to please introduce yourself as the Center Director of Vocational Training for the CDC in Pontvillot.
Thank you very much, Andre.
Over to you. You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm Heather Hallman, as you mentioned. I'm the Center Director for Vocational Training at the CDC Pontvillot. I'm sure everyone is wondering what CDC means. It's an acronym for Competency Development Center, and it's a vocational training center which is part of the Sir Wilfrid Laurier School Board. We're located in Pontvillot, Laval, and as such, we offer programs in health assistance and nursing, the PAB program, which is now called Institutional and Home Care Assistance, as well as commercial programs, secretarial studies, accounting, computing support, starting a business, etc. Our territory is very large. While most of our services are offered in Laval, our school board actually covers the regions of the Lanaudière and Laurentide as well. So that presents some challenges in terms of having students access our programs because some of them are very, very equipment heavy and have to be housed in specifically dedicated facilities. So we have another center in Saint-Eustache, which houses our carpentry programs and the heavy programs that we have in the construction field. And we're opening another point of service in Terrebonne and Mascouche. These are in partnerships with French service centers. Because of our size, we're able to do that and capitalize on, the economic advantages of working together in order to offer services. So those programs are either offered bilingually or either in uniquely Francophone cohorts or Anglophone cohorts. So that's a little bit about what we offer in vocational training at Sir Wilfrid Laurier, and I'm the director of those services.
Thank you very much for that, Heather. Next, I would like to introduce to you Walid Al-Hamad, who is also a French language learner, as well as a licensed social worker and psychotherapist. To get to know you a little bit better, Mr. Al-Hamad, I will pass the mic over to you, so you may introduce yourself.
Thank you. Yes, like you said, I'm a licensed social worker, couple and family therapist, and a psychotherapist. I have my private practice, and I'm also an external psychotherapist for the ASCS in Ganawage, working with First Nation. I also work with Montreal City Missions as a group facilitator for immigrants on the issue of cross-cultural parenting. And I'm a research assistant at McGill University.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome aboard. And next, our third panelist, Ms. Morgane Gagnon, who is also a policy researcher for the Provincial Employment Roundtable. Next to you, Morgane.
Thank you for the introduction. So yes, my name is Morgane. I'm a policy researcher with PERT. Researchers are not a regulated profession, nor do I in my field work directly with maybe potential members of professional orders. What I'll be speaking about today is mainly PERT's research on professional orders, which appears in our report, French language support for Quebec's English-speaking professionals. So this is a report we conducted over the last year or so, and I believe put out in the spring, although it may have been the fall, I can't recall. And the impetus for creating that report was hearing from our community that English speakers were struggling to practice their profession, even pre-Bill 96, owing to the language laws that were in place and the ways that these interacted or governed the different professional orders. So we pulled together a report interviewing representatives from professional orders, participants or members of professional orders, cataloging the available support programs and reviewing the different language policy documents to really get an in-depth understanding of what was available when we're looking at language learning or language support within professional orders, and maybe where there were some gaps in that. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe to slightly introduce our topic on today's panel, I would like to target a question more specifically as to the challenges that an English speaker learning French may face by switching from a profession that is not regulated to one that is regulated. And I would like to start with you, Heather, to try and answer this question from your experience and your perspective in your own field. What are some of the challenges that you have seen people face with this?
Well, I think the main challenge is that vocational training programs have requirements to be eligible to entry. And the requirements for most of them, if you're from Quebec, are secondary for French as a second language. So there's a presumption of competency there, certainly for entry into a program. But in order to be able to move through the program and go on internships and ultimately graduate and be employed in that program requires a much higher level of competency than French second language at secondary 4 level. And that becomes a huge challenge for us in terms of vocational training, because the programs are very specific in terms of the number of hours that are given for each competency, and the students move through those at very prescribed intervals. And the teachers that we have are not trained language teachers, they're trained professional in their trade. So they're secretaries who come and are trained to teach secretarial studies, computing support technicians, etc., but they're not trained language teachers. And the main challenge is that students are learning in English, but going into a working environment where they'll be mostly in French. And that has to be added on to everything else that we do in terms of an already really packed instructional schedule.
I see. Thank you for that. Same question over to you, Walid. In terms of your own experience as a professional yourself, what do you see are some of the challenges from migrating into a professional order from a non-regulated profession?
I mean, without passing the French exam, professionals won't be licensed. And so I know social workers who have master's degree, and it's been 10 years since they graduated, and they tried time after time to pass the exam. And for some reason, they just couldn't pass it. And until now, they have to work in lower jobs and have different pay. and they can't be licensed. And so it is an obstacle for many professionals really to be licensed and work with their degree.
I see. Thank you very much for highlighting that. Morgan, over to you. In terms of the research that PERT has done on this topic, are there any takeaways that you may like to bring to our attention right now?
Lead said, to join a professional order, you have to demonstrate either a French language proficiency. And so that would look like kind of one of 3 or 4 things. So either you have to have received at least 3 years of full-time study in secondary or post-secondary education in French, passed the 4th or 5th year secondary level examination with French as a first language, or obtained a secondary school certification in Quebec from 1985 onwards. And if you don't meet one of those 3 requirements, then you're required to, as Walid said, pass an OQLF French exam. And sometimes a professional order will also require you to pass a competency exam as well that's more profession specific. So we see those as 2, and often those are in French. So those are kind of 2 big French language barriers. And we can see how they might affect, in particular, interprovincial migrants and newcomers, particularly because they're less likely to have moved through the secondary school system in Quebec. And so with those kind of formal language requirements, we see kind of all these spin-off effects. So the need to integrate language training kind of prior to that, maybe at some stage in the educational system, although as Heather said, it's very packed. We can see the need for different types of language support programs, although we know that there aren't that many of those. So in PERT's research, we found a total of 14 OQLF preparation courses and 13 profession-specific training programs, which to serve the entirety of Quebec might not be wholly adequate. And we also know that there's a lack of clarity sometimes about what specific language laws are, or what specific competencies are, the difference between being confident and being proficient in a language. All these different things kind of eat away, I think, at English speakers looking to enter or to practice within professional order.
All right, thank you very much for clarifying that up. This being said, I think the next step in our discussion this morning is a more targeted question, which I will address to you, Heather, in terms of undertaking French language training, which usually falls primarily on the person himself or herself. So much that a lot of professionals are actually ending up leaving the province to go work elsewhere. What role do institutions such as schools and workplaces play in helping professionals to master French and stay in their field, and primarily stay in Quebec?
Well, I think we have a major role to fulfill in terms of doing that. As I mentioned, in vocational training or training for professional orders, the competencies are very specific. So the responsibility for language development, language acquisition, and then being able to work in a language is added on to everything that's already there in terms of the technical skills. So we work with our teachers to make sure that they're as bilingual as possible. We work with developing tools. We have a lot of lexicons and things that are specific to the program so that at least the students can acquire the terminology as a base of understanding, because we're very much aware of the fact that while they're learning in English, they're not going to be working in an environment that is exclusively English. So we try to invest as much as we can during the instructional time that we give them. And then we also encourage students to take other forms of language acquisition and proficiency development. So we have different tools for them. We have supports through adult education. We work with community partners. We have teachers who come in after class is over. In an already long and charged day, the students will even learn, more language course and take more courses afterwards. But that takes time. A language isn't acquired in a month or so. You know, we'd like to think it's intensive, but it takes a lot of time. And it's not just knowing the vocabulary, but it's also understanding the culture of the French language and the workplace and the requirements. So while we give a lot of extra courses and things, sometimes it isn't always enough. The students aren't successful, you know, especially in the nursing program where they will become a member of an order. In order to work in a public institution, they're required to have that level of competency in the language. And often the students aren't successful in those examinations, especially international students who come. And even though they're expected to have a level of proficiency in mother tongue, not second language, it becomes very challenging for them. And what we see is that while they'll be successful in the program because they've learned it in English and managed to get through the internships or the stages, they'll often go to other provinces thereafter. So it's very troubling for us because we're training people to go into the workforce and then they don't stay here and contribute, you know, to the society that we're trying to build. And the burden of a lot of that falls onto the schools who are already tasked with technical skills acquisition.
Well, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that up. Now over to you, Walid. Maybe would you like to respond to this same question?
Yeah, I mean, mentioning the individuals, usually these individuals obviously are not Francophones, and so many of them are immigrants. And so I was wondering if the system acknowledges that they have circumstances around the language, if they have other obligations in their life, and if this language is going to be another burden or a chore, you know, to do. And we all know, you know, through research, learning a language as an adult is a lot more difficult than, you know, learning it as a child. And so I know at McGill University, for example, there is a course geared to, let's say, social workers for the terminology and everything. But will that be good enough for them to practice, you know, with Francophones, or would just give them an entrance to the language, you know, or a limited usage of it? So that's why I was wondering if all the institutes have more creative ways of integrating the language into the, you know, the work field, where people can learn it and at the same time get to practice it in, you know, in some form of immersion.
Good point. Thank you very much for this. Morgan, would you like to reply?
Good question, Walid, though I know Heather's probably better place to respond. Kind of in that vein, we recently also published a report on vocational technical training in Quebec in the English language. And when we were drafting that report as kind of non-experts in that field, we'd originally thought, well, this is a perfect format and the perfect timeline for French language learning. Isn't it so simple just to integrate the two? And we, you know, quickly realized that is not the case. As you said, there are, as both Heather and Walid said, there are so many considerations to the time and energy that it takes to learn a language in addition to full-time studies. There are the different like cultural elements, as Heather had mentioned, picking up workplace slang, that kind of thing. And also maybe the difficulty of integrating into maybe like a colonial language or something like that. So I guess to speak to the role of educational institutions, it would require, or it's not something, as Heather said, that can be integrated necessarily directly into the program, because these English programs need to be the same length and have the same competencies as the French language programs. And so everything that's added on looks maybe more like an extracurricular that's added on top, that requires that additional energy and commitment to take on. So we're really interested at PERT at looking at kind of different maybe flexible opportunities? Are there things like bridging programs or different maybe work integrated internships or learning opportunities that recognize, that this language learning takes longer than a course, as you said, Lilith, or a month, as you said, Heather, and kind of integrates that as part of a longer term project, recognizing the commitment that takes?
Well, the thing that we have right now that helps address that, if you will, Morgan, is some of our programs, the ministry will give us permission to offer them as alternance travail-études, which means that we take time out of the instructional competencies and we add them to the internship experience or the stages. And we found that that's been very helpful because the students spend more time in the world of work, in the actual placements, and they get a better experience in terms of the culture of a company or of an institution and how to use the language in their profession, because we're teaching them the profession, but they have to practice it in another language. And that's particularly helpful for international students, because they come often, it's not a second language, but often it's a third or a fourth language. And, there are also people who come with the hope to become, citizens. And so the rigor that's required in order to do that is very heavy on their shoulders. And that's done in addition to probably having families, children of their own, and also having to work at the same time that they're learning. So we do have a little bit of flexibility with, alternating the length of the stages, but that's with permission. And it also takes a lot of professional development for teachers to be comfortable in doing that, because then they have to compress the curriculum that's taught in the institution.
Thank you. That's an interesting sidestep to this entire discussion right now, and it has a lot to do with inclusion and being immersive in the learning process. I would like right now to direct the next question to you, Walid, in terms of learning French as a second language for English speakers entering a professional order. Do you think that current policies and programs within professional orders assist them adequately? And if not, what do you believe needs to be done about it?
Unfortunately, I find the way it is approached is a little bit punitive. Like there's one size fits all, one exam for everyone. And if you don't pass it, then too bad, you're not going to get licensed. And the rest of your circumstances are not our problem. I really think that the concern I find here is the negative association, where people are beginning to have, or might have a negative association with the language itself, though it's not the language's problem, but then they don't want to practice it anymore, or may barely pass the exam and then never practice it, because you cannot force people to, practice in a Francophone place of work. I really think there should be a gentler approach to it. And I really think there can be programs like Morgan mentioned. There can be, the bridging of the language. We can hire people from the same culture to every group who can bridge two languages, or make it easier, making associations or making comparisons or making, the differences. This is how they see it in one culture, and that's how they see it in the French culture. It can be done in a way where it's not another chore for people who are very busy with families, where it can be fun, it can be interesting, it can be rewarding. And I'm sure, that some people can put such programs together to motivate people to learn the language and wanting to do it, versus having to do it as a chore. And then once you pass the exam, never use it again.
Very well said. Thank you for that. Heather, would you like to add anything to this?
I think Walid is absolutely right. I think sometimes these things are used as gatekeepers and in the sense of keeping out rather than letting in. And, you know, it is punitive. If you fail so many times, you know, you only get 3 chances and then, you know, your chances are gone. And I think that's an issue because language is a bit like a commitment to fitness, right? We all know that we want to be fit and we'll all join the gym in January, but how many people are there in March? Right. And it's not something that happens overnight. It's like exercise, right? The more you use it, the better you become at it. And that involves intention as well. And I think that's part of the problem is that we treat it like another subject they have to learn. And it is in some senses, but it's also the language they'll be working in, living in, earning in. And that I think takes time and it has to have a positive scope to it rather than a negative scope to it. And it's very sad, you know, when you hear, well, I'll learn it, I'll pass the test and then I'll never have to use it again, right? That's really unfortunate. It truly is, because that's not how we'll retain quality professionals in our province and in our sectors.
All right, thank you very much. Morgan, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I'd love to. Maybe to follow up on that point about taking the test and never maybe you using the language again. I think that that's something that might change under Bill 96 because it does stipulate that professionals will now have to maintain a level of French suitable to the practice of their profession. And so what we need is a widespread shift to recognize that this is a site of professional development. And as you said, Heather, something that needs to be integrated long-term in a kind of overarching way. And so that implicates maybe at the front end of things, maybe educational institutions, but additionally, professional orders themselves, we need to look to those as a site of or a source or resource for language learning. And you know, maybe the punitive piece that Walid you mentioned, it's certainly not to the advantage to English speakers or to linguistic minorities, but it's also simply not to the advantage of Quebec as a province, because we are in the midst of a labor shortage, particularly in fields like healthcare and construction. And those are 2 fields that are particularly heavily regulated or which draw on professionals from professional orders. So we need to be thinking strategically about how to enable people to integrate into linguistic minorities, to integrate into the language, into the labor market, and to retain their position there. And that comes back to lifelong language learning.
Right. Well, I guess we'll stay with you, Morgan, for the next question, really. What do you believe are some of the most important consequences from the lack of French language training and accompaniment programs available to English speakers looking to work in professional orders?
Maybe first and foremost, the one that most readily jumps to mind are the impacts on English speakers themselves, individuals looking to get a job in their field. And, you know, as Walid said, 10 years later, still aren't able to get a job because they maybe failed the course that you're only allowed to take 3 times. And we know in a kind of widespread or overarching way, English speakers in Quebec have a higher unemployment rate than French speakers by about 2%. And we know that English speakers earn a lower median after-tax income as compared to French speakers. So we're looking at issues that maybe relate to a full lack of employment or working in a job that they're overqualified for because they're not able to get the professional certification. Or alternatively, it might mean that people are leaving the province altogether. We did an employment survey in 2021, and we heard from a lot of people who were facing the idea of migrating out of the province, or alternatively lived close enough to transit to work in Ontario or in New Brunswick because they just weren't able to work in Quebec. And as a result, you know, that also impacts the broader English-speaking community who need these services, who need to be able to go to an English-speaking healthcare professional, a lawyer, anybody who works in a regulated profession and really needs to receive those often very essential services in their first language, to be able to communicate that, or in the language that they're most comfortable in. So it impacts the English-speaking community as well. We heard from Alan, I think at CASA yesterday in the panel about the need for English-speaking healthcare workers in Gaspé. And then the maybe like third group or consequence I would pull out would be the impacts on Quebec, as I said in the previous question. We're in the middle of a labor shortage, and we can't really afford to have these professionals leaving the province and working elsewhere. We need to figure out a way to retain our professionals and our English-speaking professionals to serve the province and to meet the needs that exist here.
Sure, thank you. Would you like to respond to this, Heather, or add something to this discussion?
Well, I think Morgan basically summarized the main consequences, and the main consequences is that a lot of training and time and expertise has gone in to getting people prepared to become a member of an order, and then they're not able to become and fulfill that. And what ends up happening is they either, as Walid said, they will work below their level of qualification, or they will become disillusioned and they will leave. But it also impacts the population in general. And I think that what Morgan said is very important for us to take note of, that, we do have people who need services in their mother tongue, in English and in French. And when we have people who aren't trained and available for that, everyone suffers because of lack of accessibility. So I think it has multiple impacts on the front end as well as the back end of it. But we already see the difficulty in finding people to hire, but there's also a difficulty in retaining these people once we do hire them. And I think we need to be very mindful of that as well, because we lose a lot of very talented people for these reasons. And those things are within our control. They're definitely within our control.
Thank you. Walid, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I see. I mean, a lot more consequences on a societal level where there's this negative association, where people started generalizing the issue beyond the language, where the language is politicized. For example, when youth protection were short on workers, and that was, a job that was designated to only social workers to be, delegates of youth protection. The government opened up and started accepting criminologists, psychologists, and other people, different professions, to work in youth protection because there was a need. And now we have a greater need in the health system, and they're still refusing to open up on the language issue, or try to compromise. And for example, I know that there are temporary permits, but they're not easy to get and they don't grant them to everyone. But there can be such options where people have a temporary permit where they can work while they're learning the language, rather than, punish them and say, no, you cannot make a proper living for your family until you pass this exam. So I think the consequences are a lot larger than the language itself.
Okay, that's a very interesting point. I believe right now we have reached a point in this panel where we would like to address a general discussion based on what has been said so far. And we would like to look over more specifically the role of professional orders in addressing linguistic barriers for individuals looking to enter an order. As professional orders adequately addressing linguistic challenges, why or why not? We've already touched on that point up until now, but maybe now is a chance to go a bit further on this very specific issue. And for that, I would like to start off with Heather.
Well, I think we need to work more closely with our professional orders. In the past, there's been a bit of a disconnect between the educational sector and then the orders. And so the job of the education sector is to train, the students, and then they go and they become a member of an order. We need to work more in partnership. I'll give you an example with the OIIAQ. For our nursing students, the licensed practical nurses, we've taken steps to have them actually come into the center and work with our teachers and explain the requirements, but not only the requirements to become a member of the order, but what the order provides for its members thereafter as professionals in the field, what supports are there for them as well. And I think that conversation is an important one, and building those partnerships. Oftentimes, excuse me, exams will be translated into English, but they're not good quality translations. And the student can write the exam in English, but the quality of the exam needs to be worked on. So those are some issues as well. And really recognizing and understanding the importance of having well-formed professionals as a member of an order validates the profession and gives it even more importance in the province. So I think that's an important thing for us to do, is to work in partnership and to have our students, when they graduate, be honored to become a member of an order, understand what that means, and value and treasure that as something that that makes it a marquee profession in our province.
Great point. Thank you for this. Walid, would you like to add something?
Like I do in my profession, to be able to help anybody, I need to know where they're coming from and why they're where they're at. And I think just summing it up by saying, oh, these are individuals who need to learn French, that's not enough. Where are they coming from? What do they need? What would make them learn better? If we care to have them learn the language and the culture, then we need to be more welcoming than that. And we need to understand their circumstances.
Right. Morgan, care to comment?
A representative from a professional order join us today. But we have spoken with a number of different representatives, and those conversations have been really beneficial. And I think oftentimes it's a matter of articulating a need and the desire for partnership that maybe awakens more of the concrete steps towards that. I think it's also relevant that the role of professional orders, rightly so, is to ensure that members are qualified and able to competently practice their profession, especially when, largely these are professions that are regulated for kind of a public good. You need doctors who are qualified and engineers who are qualified and that sort of thing. And it makes sense in that context why maybe the idea of language learning would fall off the priority list. But at the same time, professional orders play a large role in conducting professional development with their members. And I think language training falls well within that scope. And I think maybe sometimes it's not picked up as a thread because there are so many different other bodies or groups who we might also view as responsible for facilitating that language learning. There's the educational institutions, there's the government, there's maybe the individuals. And so it's unclear who needs to ultimately pick up that responsibility. And maybe that can be spread over different bodies, but I think there's needs to be maybe some recognition of the importance, particularly under Bill 96 with the stipulation to maintain a working level of French, that this is a requirement for professional development that needs to be integrated within professional orders or offered by professional orders.
Thank you for that. With this being said, I will turn my attention over to you, Heather, again. Are you aware of any particular innovative solutions or programs that have been implemented either by your center or by someone else to help professionals wanting to enter an order overcome this obstacle of the difficulties of learning French and being supported to do so?
Well, I think the innovation that we have is recognizing that we have to work with our other partners, even in education, in order to support the students. So what we've done in our school board, and I know quite a few others do it as well, is we try to work with our teachers in adult education, especially the ones that teach in francisation, to work and partner with our teachers as well, so that we can build, as I said, lexicons that have terminology, but we also have to teach the students where that fits in. Not, having the terms is wonderful, but you have to be able to articulate and use them. And the other thing that we work on is supporting our students in terms of documentation, because language is also, it's written as well as spoken. So we work a lot with helping our students with the documentation in French, because Morgan's right, an order is there for a reason, and it requires and supports the need for rigor, especially in the healthcare or in other professions. And we're a partner in that. In terms of innovation with language, we work on a lot of different things with our students. There are all sorts of apps that we give them and different kinds of things. We offer lunch and learns for them. We offer mentoring with them. So oftentimes we'll have someone who is an experienced, student or be able to bring in a newcomer and support them in that process and continue with them, because I think that's also important. And giving the professional development, our teachers take a lot of professional development in terms of that. And the other thing we do is we offer prep courses for them in terms of what they could expect when they go and write an order exam. And those are very successful. And that's an innovation that we've come up with that's very, very popular. And it supports the students in terms of reading case scenarios, understanding how to put their learning into action. So those are a few of the things that we've tried to do. But it's a start of a process. It's by no means an end.
Yes, I understand. Thank you for that. And congratulations also on your initiatives. I would like to hear from you, Walid, about your knowledge of such innovations within your own surroundings.
Yes, I agree that the order know what they're doing, but from what I learned, we live in a culture of individualism, and the world is split into two different cultures: individualism and collectivism. Of course, there are different versions of each. Sometimes the approaches of one may not apply for the other. And what I'm wondering is, are we taking that in consideration? Because even in social work, if you are helping people from a collectivist culture with individualistic solution, then you end up oppressing them as you're trying to help them. Do we have that versatility in our approaches? Do we have that versatility in our understanding of how to teach the language, for example, or what would be more accepted or better understood, all of this. And for that reason, I was thinking, do we have cultural matching methods where we have teachers who have already crossed that bridge and know the connection between two languages and can pass them on to a certain group of people, or are we the kind of people who know we don't care? We're just going to give you the exam, you pass it, and the story. So that's the question.
Well said. Morgan, care to comment?
Different, but I was really interested yesterday to hear from our keynote speaker, Donna Lewis, about what they're doing in Wales to revitalize the Welsh language with different programs such as Work Welsh, but also their very flexible online platform and the way that they're designing it to be very user driven, I believe, and meeting the needs that people are bringing to them in terms of, say, different flexibility or different content requirements. So they spoke to not only the capacity, but the need to build confidence in a language. And it would be wonderful to see something like that emerge that is, you know, a one-stop shop for language learning that takes the confusion of of navigating the different resources and the pressure off the individual to do that, to have that in one place, and allows you to find support that meets your profile, or and on the other end of things, the creation of different supports, as Walid is saying, that recognize the different frameworks that people are coming from.
To build on what Morgan said, I think that's important. I think that we're in a situation where everyone has their voyage of discovery in terms of what's available. And having a one-stop shop, if you will, where everything is brought together, I think would be very, very beneficial. Because oftentimes in communities, people have to go and search these things out. They're not obviously or readily available to them. Very good.
Heather, it helps you to figure out maybe your personal journey and to understand that you have your professional training, your coursework and your education in that component, but also to figure out where French language training would fit into that and what it can look like in those different ways. It helps you to, I think, to visualize and to actualize that, those resources and to access that.
Very true.
Very interesting. Thank you. That's a wonderful discussion that we are having right now this morning on this so crucial topic. And now I believe we will turn our attention to the questions that were raised in the Q&A box. We actually have a couple right now that have been coming in. I will start off with the first one that is from Robin Long, who is asking, keeping entry-level skills in mind, language level is subjective to the different trades. How accurate are the professional order exams in relation to the expected fluency level? How congruent with the expectations of a workforce? For example, can students use support tools that would be expected use in the workforce, like spell checking in office packages, etc.? Care to answer? Sorry, Heather, would you please start off the discussion?
Thank you. It's a very good question that Robin is asking. I think oftentimes it's extremely subjective. And I think that oftentimes students, when they're writing the exams, do not have access to those kinds of tools. And that's unfortunate, because we're trying to test their knowledge of their profession and the order that they are going into. Not test their knowledge necessarily of the language, but their ability to use the language to express what they know. And I think there's a big difference there. And I think that's something that has to be addressed by the orders, and the quality of translation of documents and assessment tools as well is something that's important, because if they're not translated properly, then we don't necessarily have the ability to get out the things that we want to investigate, to find out if our candidate knows those technical things. So I think that we have to be very careful about what exactly it is we're assessing when we have those tools. And oftentimes I'm not sure that's the case.
Thank you. Maybe Walid, would you like to comment on this question?
I really don't know. I mean, how the exam can really dictate if people will even use the language or how good they'll be at it. There's no way of knowing. And I've known people who lived in Montreal for 10 years and couldn't pass it. And I know people who arrived a few months ago and then they passed it the first time. but it was not really an indicator of much. That's all I can say.
Okay, that's fine. Morgan, anything to add?
Yeah, this is something I think I've spoken to Robin about previously. The idea, especially that different professions would maybe require different levels of competency in different elements of language learning. So do you need stronger written or oral or maybe audio competencies? And from what I know, those aren't heavily integrated into particularly the competency exams from the professional orders, because as Heather said, those are more focused on demonstrating your competency. You just have to do that through your second language when you're an English speaker. But this is a fun and an interesting opportunity to think about the way that language refracts through these through the testing elements.
Thank you. We have another question also from Robin, asking, building bridges between institutionalized learning systems and professional development in the workforce is a great idea. For example, Heather mentioned having the OIIAQ come to the centers. How feasible is it to integrate this type of initiative into the program of study? It would build buy-in from all parties for the time frame to learn language, as not just during student studies, but long-term. Are there any barriers to this? We will keep on with the same order maybe and start off with Heather.
It is a great initiative. We've been trying to get the OIIAQ into our center for quite some time. And there was a great receptiveness recently, and we're very happy about that. They came and they met with the teachers on a pedagogical day and spent the entire day talking about basically, not just the exam, but the order in general, and what they require, where they're heading, and where we can be a partner in that journey with them. So that was a very important first step. The next step, I think, that we've recognized and that we're trying to put into action is that they come and they meet with the students, because those are their future members. And it's in their best interest to meet with them and to try to find a way in terms of not only support, but induction, bringing them into the profession and then supporting them and retaining them in the profession. And that speaks to being a partner in the professional development that will take place. But it's important that they hear from the end user in terms of what that professional development needs to be, and not just in terms of the rigor in the practices, but also in the culture of the profession, and in the languages that profession has to take on. And part of what we're also working on with them orbits around the truth and reconciliation, and making sure that we understand and embed in the curriculum notions of diversity and different cultures and different representation. And one thing that always comes out of that is never about us without us. So I think that's important that the orders are there. And different orders have different levels of rigor, and rightfully so. But I think as a partner in a profession, they play a big role in, as I said, the induction of members and the retention of members and the valorization of those members afterwards as well.
Well said, thank you. Walid, would you care to add anything?
I'm jealous of you, Heather, for that.
I don't do that very often.
Because I don't see really these bridges. They are probably, as students, we saw members of the order come once or twice to talk to us, but probably that was about it. But I don't see any bridges concerning, especially the language and the profession. And yes, I agree, there should be bridges where they can ease the student into, concurrently with the language and work slowly and gradually without, overwhelming them. That'd be a great idea.
Well, recently, we read in the news, a lot of the students have failed. Over half of them failed the order exam, and we have to ask ourselves why. Students who are Anglophone can write the exam in English, but we have to ask ourselves, was it, because of the pandemic and more online learning? I'm not entirely sure about that, but I do think that one of the things that impacts on that is the ability to deliver the curriculum in depth and to make the links that are in the curriculum. And that's in all the trades, whether it's in construction or whether it's in health or whether it's in accounting or computing support, understanding the gestalt of things and understanding the links between the different elements, I think is critical in learning to know versus learning to do. And I think that's really important. And I think the orders play a big role there. I really do feel that.
Thank you. Morgan?
Yeah, I think where, these bridges exist, they're often maybe new, and where they're not new, they're maybe more ad hoc. There are 46 professional orders governing 53 professions. And then there are all the different educational institutions that they would have partnerships with. And what we found in our reporter, or maybe what we didn't find, was a kind of systematization in those relationships and in those bridges. And so I think the barrier, if there is one, is the lack of the bridge. And in that case, it's the solution would be to develop those partnerships and to do it in a sustainable and I think systemic kind of way that ensures that they exist for everyone, for each professional order.
Thank you. Well, we will close off our discussion with one last question from the Q&A box, which comes from Jacqueline Vachon, which asks, with many Quebec educational programs now requiring a minimum B1 or B2 French fluency for program entry, this has likely reduced recruitment of future health professionals. This approach ensures students will be able to function in clinical internship placements. Thoughts on this French fluency requirements for program entry versus having French language courses integrated in course curriculum? Heather?
Well, I guess we end in the same way that we started. And that's exactly what I was, discussing when we first came on, is the challenge we have in integrating that into the instruction, where the instruction is already very, very prescribed and doesn't have a lot of fluidity in terms of being able to, maneuver the hours, etc. So that's something that we try to do. Is it systemic? And is it as formalized as we'd like? No, because sometimes, especially in health, it's a rigorous program, and some of the competencies are very, very challenging, especially for second and third language learners. And to be able to enter the program, if you're a local student, it's French second language at that level. If you're an international student, it's the B1 or B2, but the order requires even a higher level of competency in order to be successful. So it becomes a real challenge in terms of how we get the students to that level and have them be comfortable in it and be able to work in it, because it's one thing to learn the language, it's another thing to work in the language when it's not your first language or your mother tongue.
Oh, most definitely. Thank you. Walid, over to you. Would you care to add anything?
I'll only comment about how challenging it was for students at the English universities to find internships here, because there are very few places that would take, these students who came here to study in English and then probably go back home, didn't come here to learn the language, and that's what it was still an obstacle for them. And internships were very limited. But I can see, even with the courses that they can take at the university, it was still not at that level that would enable them to carry a fluid conversation in the French language.
I see. Morgan, final thoughts?
You know, from a practical standpoint, I understand if a program requires off the bat immediate French language proficiency to some degree, it would only be discouraging to allow students into that program when they don't have that proficiency because you're not setting them up for success. I think, you know, integrating languages into course curriculum is also helpful. I think that what it comes down to is that there's no one size fits all solution. We need robust language learning, and it needs to look like a lot of different things. It needs to look like language supports. It could look like integrated French language learning where that's possible in the classroom. It could look like bridging programs. It could look like work integrated learning. So I think maybe the framing of an either or could be dissolved. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for this. I would like right now to thank the audience and our panelists for this very interesting and enlightening discussion that we just had on entering professional orders with the theme of learning French as one of the competencies required. Our panel is now over. We will take a short break for lunch right now, and we will be right back at 1:30 for the next panel, which is on education to employment in Quebec's English-speaking communities. Thank you very much, everyone, for staying on and for contributing to this discussion. Thank you.
Welcome back to PERT's Putting Language to Work conference. What an exciting day full of engaging discussion. I'm Lorraine O'Donnell. I am Research Associate at the Quebec English-speaking Communities Research Network at Concordia University. I'm happy to introduce our current panel. It's the last panel of the conference. It's called Education to Employment in Quebec's English-speaking Communities. Despite high levels of educational attainment, English speakers in Quebec continue to face employment challenges as a linguistic group. This panel will explore the relationship between education and employment for Quebec's English speakers and what solutions can be deployed to address existing challenges and barriers. And I would like to thank PERT for bringing up this important topic and assembling these illustrious speakers today. So I'll start with my opening remarks. First, I would like to welcome our panelists. They are Christine Grenier, Center Coordinator, Anchor Academic and Vocational Education Center. Hi, Christine. John Davids, Research Coordinator, Black Community Resource Center, BCRC. Adrienne Winrow, Executive Director, Youth for Youth Quebec. I apologize for the cat noise. I'll close my door in a sec. Angela Stevens, Dean of Faculty, Professional Services and Continuing Education, Cégep Champlain St. Lawrence. So hi there, Angela, and welcome everyone. So I will ask each panelist to introduce yourselves with one key question in mind. What is the reality for English-speaking students making the transition from education to employment in Quebec today? And we're going to start with Adrienne, and a reminder, Adrienne, you have a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Adrienne, have to unmute yourself.
Good point. Thank you. Thank you, Christine. Thanks to my co-panelists and for all the guests to all the guests for being here. Thank you, Lorraine, for the introduction. My name is Adrienne. I'm the Executive Director of Youth for Youth Quebec. I've been serving the organization since 2019. Youth for Youth Quebec is a for youth by youth organization. Our board of directors is youth-led, has an average age of 25 years old, and they represent multiple regions of Quebec. Y4Y has given me and my colleagues the privilege of meeting English-speaking youth from across the province over time and understanding their diverse realities as a linguistic minority where they live. So I will say that it is hard to make large generalizations about this part of the population. However, I hope to raise some interesting points that we've learned from young people in consultation with them over time that will be relevant to this panel discussion. As for the question, I think there hasn't been much change in the reality of the fact that there is still this existential question for English-speaking youth of should I stay or should I go? English-speaking youth, although highly educated, great on paper, and in most cases hardworking as anybody else, as hardworking as anyone else, often face the reality that perhaps their confidence in their second language or third language or fourth language, depending on whom you're speaking with, may put them in a situation where they're deciding that they're not quite adequate to fulfill a position that might have a bilingual requirement. And whether or not this is true is something we can definitely debate, and I want to, but in the meantime, there are several realities that are particular to English-speaking youth, and then there are other realities that are not unique, that are common to youth who are entering the workforce, which is one of the most pivotal points in any person's life and beginning of their career. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Adrienne. I will now turn to Christine.
Hi, everyone.
If you would like to respond.
To respond, or do I?
Sorry, to say your piece. Yes, sorry.
Yes, okay. Thank you for the invite. I'm very happy to be here today. Actually, I run a little center, very small in a rural community in the Baie-des-Chaleurs region of the Gaspé Coast. I'm actually neighbor to one of your panelists yesterday, Alan Richards, which is down the road from each other. So I represent, a vulnerable population. Our reality is very different than a lot of other centers outside this region. The reality of the students leaving the education, going to the job market varies tremendously based on so many variables. Was there any French second language in the program they took? Some do, some don't. Do they have stages in their program? Some do, some don't. Having a stage will break a barrier already for them, just like having some French will break a barrier for them. Were they able to get an interview in their mother tongue in English? Again, that plays a huge role in whether or not they can get a job, right? Being in the region versus being in a city, again, big difference for those students. So there's so many variables that make it more or even or less difficult to transition from the program, from their certification to the job market. So that's my view on that.
Thank you. And you guys are great. You're on time, not only ready, but on time. That's makes my job a lot easier. We'll now turn to John Davids. And just to repeat the question for the audience, what is the reality for English-speaking students making the transition from education to employment in Quebec today? John? Can you unmute, John?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I just had the worst timing for a connection issue. But good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Lorraine, for introducing me. And thank you for all the co-panelists and all the audience members for being here, and to PERT as well for organizing this. My name is John Davids, and I'm the research coordinator at the Black Community Resource Center. We're a nonprofit organization based in Côte-des-Neiges, and we offer a wide range of programs and services to community members who are either part of the English-speaking Black community or not. I've been a researcher at the BCRC since 2020, and have a background in political science and in sociology. And I'm here today to offer my perspective based on some of the research I've conducted in my role with regards to education and employment. To address the question, in my perspective, the reality is that it's challenging for many young people to transition from their studies to employment for a wide variety of reasons, many of which aren't particularly unique to Quebec. For instance, the variety of employment opportunities in our market may not match the variety of programs and fields of study that students may have done or may have interest in. There are certain sectors or industries that are larger or more present in Quebec than others. And so based on what you've studied, your prospects for finding a job in the same field may be higher or lower. And there may also be pressure or temptation to look outside of the province for employment opportunities which match your field of study. So some of these things aren't particularly unique to Quebec. For me, however, what's also interesting are the changing economic and social conditions in our society. And to some degree, I find them to be rather unique. I find this time to be rather unique. There is a lot of economic uncertainty with trends such as the rising cost of living. Students today find themselves facing particular challenges that may not have been as apparent even just a few years ago. They may be more pressured to find employment to put food on their tables and not necessarily do something in their field. And also, in regards to the current context, we're also facing a labor shortage in this province across many areas. At the same time, we're seeing significant changes to language policy. The labor shortage may help in one's search for employment, with employers being increasingly pressured to find workers. But at the same time, language policies may make that search more difficult if they don't speak French at a level which is high enough for any given workplace. So these two forces or pressures, which anyone entering the labor market, particularly English speakers, it's something they have to be wary of and will have to navigate. So for me, that's to some degree the reality facing students who are or will be making the transition to the workforce.
Thank you very much, John. And Angela, last but not least, we'd like to hear your perspective on that question. Please unmute yourself. I don't hear Angela. Do people hear her? No.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Phew, sorry. I thought my settings were okay. So it's a pleasure for me to be here with you today. Thank you very much for the invitation. As mentioned, my name is Angela Stevens. I'm the Dean of Faculty, Professional Services, and Continuing Education at Cégep Champlain St. Lawrence. So Cégep Champlain St. Lawrence is the only English-speaking Cégep in the Quebec City region, but also in the eastern part of the province. We welcome students from the English-speaking high schools of our region and outside of the Quebec City region, and that makes up 25% of our student population, and we complete the rest of our student population with students from the French-speaking high schools. The total population of our college, we are small, as I mentioned, is approximately 950 students. So I know there are some secondary schools that are bigger than our Cégep, but that is our reality. And this will be our official limit in the years coming with respect to the new Charter of the French Language, Law 14. So the reality, I think, and Adrian and Christine, you touched on it as well, but the reality of our students at St. Lawrence making the transition to employability has to do with accessibility. And accessibility to programs, whether at whatever level of education they might be, in their true field of interest, so they can build a career in a field and in an area that is going to be stimulating and motivating for them to continue. So given our size, we're limited in the diversity of programs that we can offer. We have to keep our programs viable, and therefore we're mainly a pre-university Cégep with only one technical program. So since 2016, 86% of our English-speaking students, when they come to St. Lawrence, they are entering into the pre-university programs that we offer. And only 6.8% are applying into our technical program. 7% apply into our DEC Pathway program. And DEC Pathway, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, it allows students, normally it's 1 semester, it gives them an opportunity to explore a program. They're not sure what they want to do with the rest of their lives. So it gives them a semester or 2 to explore different courses from different programs, or maybe catch up on missing prerequisites that they might need. So during the same time period, what we've seen is that 41% of our students have graduated, the English-speaking population, 43 have dropped out or they've left St. Lawrence. And the balance are still here with us. The statistics are only from 2016. So some leave to be able to study in a particular technical program, whether that's in French or whether that's in English, and they move away from Quebec City, and some don't continue their studies at all. So I think that access to having education in their language of study that they're comfortable in, to remove some of those obstacles and barriers that I think it was Christine mentioned in terms of French, the language and the opportunities that can provide it with them. That's something that has a big impact on the transition for our students at the CEGEP level.
Thanks so much, Angela, and all the panelists for that first answer. I'm going to move to a new part of the panel now, and it's targeted questions. So we'll start with Adrian. Adrian, PERT's research shows that English-speaking youth face particular difficulties integrating in Quebec's labor market. What are some of the challenges that the youth face, and what are their current opportunities presented by Quebec's labor market?
Thank you for the question, Lorraine. I think that there are some challenges, as John mentioned, that are common to all youth, English speaking or otherwise. But I'll speak to a few of those challenges. We understand from our consultations with youth that often a young person who's at the university level, facing the prospect of graduation, the decision of whether to continue on to grad studies or to enter the labor market, often look at the jobs that are available and advertised online and think of themselves as not qualified, because often the list of qualifications and skills requirements are extensive on the jobs posted on LinkedIn, for example, or Indeed, and they don't see enough opportunity for entry-level jobs on the job market today. They consider themselves to have too few job experiences. And often that's true. Full-time study is full-time work. And also holding down a part-time job in spite of the economic pressures to do so is extremely difficult. It's ever been thus, but the pressure to also hold down a part-time job is often too much for the majority of students. However, there are internships. Universities are putting a great deal of effort into creating new internship opportunities for young people. However, the youth with whom we've consulted often find that the competition is fierce for those internships. So again, we see an opportunity for universities, and we know that they're working on it, to create more of these work study programs and learning opportunities for youth. Again, English-speaking youth reflect what many others feel, many others in the English-speaking community feel, which is a generalized anxiety over the political situation in Quebec, but a strong desire to remain in Quebec. Youth during their CEGEP and university years are building relationships, support systems of their own, friend groups and community, and economic considerations come into play as well. So the question of should I stay or should I go, the economic question wins out often because the cost of living elsewhere in Canada is so incredibly high. In terms of challenges, again, French language proficiency continues to be the greatest barrier to an English speaker's ability to find, maintain, and advance within the Quebec labor force. That said, there are some opportunities. Lorraine, you've got your hand up. Have I hit my 3 minutes to answer challenges and opportunities?
Afraid so.
can I speak to opportunities for a moment?
Yes.
Okay. In terms of opportunities for English-speaking youth, there is the prospect of remote work, which they are accessing more and more frequently. Many students are actually using internship programs to subsidize their work for companies outside of Quebec, outside of Canada. That's an interesting trend. And also the fact that the labor market projection is that the current labor shortage will last for a whole generation should favor English-speaking youth entering the job market as much as anyone else. You know, the priorities of Generation Y and Generation Z workers are now being reflected. Companies are actually adjusting their practices and policies to make their companies and organizations look more like what Generation Y and Generation Z workers want to see. The ability to negotiate salary, work-life balance, and engage in training programs that can advance their careers. So these are some opportunities of the current workforce. Again, we need to talk more about English-speaking youth's ability to access those opportunities. Thank you.
Adrian, you're raising such important points. Thank you very much. We could go on all day. Now, I will give each other panelist 1 minute if they have something they would like to add or disagree with something Adrian said. And we'll start with Christine. So I'll be strict about the time, Christine, so we can keep on track.
Okay. I'd like to definitely reinforce some of the things that Adrian said. Our communities here, our Anglophone communities, tend to isolate themselves. They feel like it's not for them. It's not their community. They don't participate in, whether it's social activities, whether it's festivals, they don't participate in them because it's not their community. They don't have a tendency to incorporate themselves in the community. So they isolate themselves, which is, you know, disadvantage to them for sure. We talk about universities, programs in the regions. You know, there's very few programs in the regions and at university level. And I've built a relationship with a partnership with Lucar here at my center, where we've put a room together for distance ed. So they use it for their students in French, and the dream and the hopes that someday we can build some partnerships with some Anglophone universities to start sharing those programs in the regions to help our region reach a higher level of education, to make it more accessible to our communities. So that's my dream. Anybody who can help me with that. So we need to build partnerships for our regions. So that's what I wanted to reinforce, Adrian.
Thank you, Christine. And let's talk, because I work at Concordia, and maybe we can
please
do something. That's what these meetings are for. So let's get in touch. Now, John, do you have something to say in a minute in response to Adrian's point?
Not particularly. I think both Adrian and Christine raised great points. And in my opening remarks, I also kind of raised some points that might have touched on this question. So I don't really have much more to add to that. I think the points raised were great.
Okay.
Can I steal this minute?
You have, how about we give Angela her minute? We're supposed to move on to the second question in 1 minute. So I guess I have to say no. Angela.
I'll try to be quick. I would echo what Adrian brought up about the challenges, and I would go back to what I was saying in my introduction about accessibility for our youth to have access to cégep and university programs that they're actually interested in, and to be able to continue those studies in English in the community where they would like to follow those studies. And as Christine was mentioning, we need to get more creative in how we're going to offer those opportunities to those students. We need to look at partnerships, like you mentioned, Christine. We need to look more, I think, to the online possibilities. And if I get an opportunity to, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I would leave that part at that, but I think there are opportunities to try to help some of the challenges that they are facing. We just need to get a little bit more creative in how we approach the solutions.
Fabulous. And Christine, it's your turn to talk, so you can sneak in what you were going to say before, but I have a targeted question for you.
Okay, well, it's one of the opportunities that Adrienne was working on. And like we were lucky enough in our region that our Emploi Quebec office is willing to fund some immersion programs for our clientele that have followed vocational trades in order to be better prepared for the job force. Our biggest challenge there is the student buy-ins. It's very difficult to get people to come take French courses in an intense fashion. So I just wanted to mention that. So my question, are you reading the question for me?
I was going to, so here goes. PERT's 2021 report on English language vocational and technical education in Quebec found that there are gaps in the access to English language tech VOC programs in Quebec, particularly in regions. What is the role of vocational and tech training programs in addressing English speakers' employment challenges? How do we begin to address gaps and barriers to this? And we've just got around 2 minutes now, Christine.
All right, so I'll try to be quick. Well, I've been preaching this for some time now. I don't know how it works for the CEGEPs, but I think for your technical programs, Angela, it's the same as me. When we want to offer a program, Lorraine, we have to go through the Ministry of Education to ask for an authorization to do so. And part of the process is to get Emploi Quebec to give us their advice on the needs of our region. And that needs to change, because right now, the way it's set up, it's basically the big centers that have to offer everything. And the regions, well, our needs are very limited. So it should be the provincial needs that are addressed, not the local needs. After all, there's mobility. It's not difficult. Teleworking is available. A lot of people will move for work anyway. So where to get your education shouldn't be as important as how many people have access to the education. So that needs to be looked at in a different angle so that we can offer more training overall in the province. Montreal can't do it all. They know they can't do it all. They're limited also, right? So we have to give opportunities. There's some buildings that are not at capacity in the regions, which could be used. It's not a very good use of investment, in my opinion. Again, making hybrid programs, I completely agree with Angela. We need to look at more online, hands-on, also combined programming so that we can give more access to more people that are isolated. That's very important. We need to make part of every program French. I mean, there has to be more French included in the programming. The ratio would vary depending on the need of the industry, but I think it's a must, so that we can break all those barriers for the students. And we need to get more employer buy-in. They need to be more committed. I was able to do that here for my nursing program. When there was this big rush last year, they didn't, the SIS didn't want to look at my students because they're Anglophone. So we went from there, from having many, many discussions to the point where he realized not only did he want them, but he was going to interview them in English so that he could know who's in front of them. And it was his responsibility afterward as an employer to continue the education of this, to work on their French language skills. So we went from, I don't even want them, to yes, I want them, and I will work with them ongoingly. So there's a lot of work to be done with our employees as well.
Thank you. So much being said that's so valuable, and I'm glad that someone is taking notes and will report on this conversation. Adrienne, in about a minute and a half, do you have a response to make to Christine?
Sure. I mean, I think Christine, for her comments, she gave very specific examples. I'm not sure that I can address how we begin to address the gaps and barriers in the access to vocational and technical training, but I can express the sentiment on behalf of my colleagues and the youth with whom we consult and their teachers, because we know from our work that the prospect of being able to get into a technical program is often a very strong driver for many, many young people to complete high school in the first place, or to return to school and get their GED in order to enter those technical training programs about which they'll feel passionate and can see a future that includes active participation in the workforce. So it's incredibly important. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrienne. John, do you have some comments to make? A couple minutes.
Sure. Just to say quickly that with a lot of the youth I've worked with, a lot of the time people are kind of either pretty scared to even apply to jobs that have French language requirements, even if they speak some basic level of French or French to some degree. So personally, I'm very curious with like about innovative solutions and things such as learn as you earn, having an employer kind of understand the situation and try to help and play an active role in helping someone improve their French language skills while working. So so that's just an area that I have a great curiosity in, and I hope it can kind of be built upon. Yeah.
Thank you very much, John. Angela, have you something to add?
I would like to add on what Christine was mentioning. I think the importance of vocational and technical training is that these types of trainings offer the students very specific skill sets that can really help improve their employability. And they're short programs. Very often, some might be only 60 hours, some might be 900 or 1200 hours, which may seem like a lot of hours, but it really, in about a year and a half, person can walk away from that type of training with some very good skills that can either improve their employment situation or perhaps give them an opportunity to have a promotion within the organization that they already are. So it is really important for that sort of lifelong learning element or professional development. And I think that they can play a really important role in continuing to help people stay stimulated and up to date in their area or in their field.
Thank you, Angela. John, I'm going to turn to you now with the targeted question. Students who pursue post-secondary education have diverse profiles. They include parents, immigrants, people in precarious economic situations, racialized individuals, and mature workers. Furthermore, well, as you've already mentioned, French language barriers can exacerbate or worsen some of the existing challenges that these students face. From your perspective, what are some solutions to address the intersectional barriers that I've just laid out facing these students?
Yeah, that's a very great question. And I wanted to start with the barrier of the French language. This applies to students, but even beyond those who are currently studying. Personally, a solution, as ambitious as it may sound, would be to make French learning and courses universally accessible to everyone living in Quebec and perhaps beyond. If people don't have the opportunity to learn French or can't afford to, this is a barrier that I see as gonna remain. And with online learning now being fairly common, it's not really inconceivable that the opportunity to learn French can be made possible for everyone in Quebec. For me, it's not a question of capacity, it's more of a question of priority. And it's not just governments, but as I mentioned, employers can also play a role in making this a reality. So I'm not going to repeat what I said about learn as you earn. Now, with regards to the other barriers, as the question itself suggests, solutions have to be intersectional, meaning that they have to take into account the different ways that different groups of people are facing barriers to education and employment. They have to take into account the nature of these barriers and the extent of them. And thus, policies and solutions need to be intersectionally informed. For that to happen, there is still, in my opinion, a need for research on these different identities and groups of people, the barriers they face, and how those barriers change if someone holds several identities as part of several groups. For instance, if we're talking about a racialized new immigrant who happens to live below the poverty line, we need to research not just how each of these identities may pose barriers in and of themselves, but when combined, what impact does that have on an individual? This is my understanding of what being intersectionally informed means. I also believe that we should take a rights-based approach to this research, and it's necessary to identify who the duty bearers are, that is, those who are responsible for protecting and ensuring the rights of others being identified, and who the rights holders are as well. It helps make it clearer who can do what. And lastly, we also need to be open and honest about these barriers and what's causing them. Are all of these coincidental? Is this just a regular problem in our society that came out of nowhere? In some cases, from my perspective, these barriers can be man-made. These are barriers that we have erected, for instance, capping enrollment at CEGEP or determining who's English and French and what rights they have. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we have policies that in and of themselves create barriers. And of course, this is not divorced from politics. I don't know of any educational system in the world which is fully divorced from politics. For me, the answer to the question is it's fundamentally political, and it can't really be shied away from. So this is a question that I would love to hear a policymaker or decision maker in education also have a crack at answering. They're in a position to bring about solutions on a societal level or in a sectorial level, something that's not afforded to most people. I'll just be a last moment, Lorraine. I just wanted to say, let's keep that in mind because many of these barriers didn't fall out of the sky. And perhaps most importantly, for me, we can't really be scared to talk about these things. I don't accept that well-being and vitality of different students in Quebec, whether they're English speaking or not, or immigrants or not, is ever considered to be a taboo subject. So I thank all the co-panelists and even PERT for helping to advance these discussions.
John, you said the P word and I saw floating the thumbs up and clapping hands there on the side. So apparently a number of people in the group agree with you, and I can certainly say that I do. And thank you for bringing up those points. Adrian, do you have something to say to respond to John's comment?
I mean, I would just mention that I find it interesting to watch the cascade of changes being brought about in terms of policy related to employment. An example would be the fact that the Liberals temporarily lifted the cap on off-campus work hours for international students, for example. And these are all brought about by the economic reality of the labor shortage. I think equity in hiring practices should be top of mind for all employers. We're seeing a good trend in favor of that, but more needs to be done to sensitize employers. It's the responsibility is not, entirely on the workers. It's heavily on the employers. We also talk a lot in our organization and outwardly about linguistic insecurity, the experience that English-speaking youth have when they're going for through the hiring process. English-speaking youth and youth who identify with multiple different communities are great on paper. When they get into an interview situation, they might be experiencing one particular kind of insecurity that doesn't necessarily mean that they are not a fantastic candidate for a job. We have to talk more about these insecurities, name them, put them into a box, and make sure that employers can identify them and say, I'm still looking at a fantastic candidate who's experiencing a particular kind of insecurity at this moment, given the high stress situation that an interview implies, and still consider them for the job that they are highly qualified to fulfill. We could talk more, but I support everything that John said, and we need to talk more about the responsibility of the employer when considering candidates.
Thank you, Adrian. Christine, do you have comments to make?
Yeah, I agree with John. Like, when it comes to advocacy, it's important that we're smart about whose door we knock at when it's time to advocate for I call them my students because I work in a school, right? And I'll knock at different doors depending on what I'm trying to get done. And politically, anytime I have an opportunity, I definitely speak to the situations. I mean, they need our students. That's the reality, right? So they need to put more effort into doing what they need to do in order to put them to work. So, and I think when we approach it that way, I seem to get more success that way when we stress the point that we should be partners in order to get everyone on the job market that's available, especially someone who's a Quebecer. Their roots are already here. Your chances of keeping them are greater than someone else. So
interesting how we keep hearing, well, especially with Christine, the word partnership, another P word. That's clearly key to what's going on in this situation and also proposed solutions. Thanks, Christine. And Angela, have you got a response to John's comments?
Yes, I do. I think that as institutions, we need to support our students who are living through those multiple types of barriers and obstacles that are put in front of them. So that support needs to be financial, it might be childcare, it might be access to the different help services, even academic support to help get them through, especially if they're not studying in their first or even their second language. But what we've seen at St. Lawrence is that it's not enough to have those services and to have the support network in place. You have to promote it. Students have to know that it's there, and then they have to know how and where to go and get it. So at the CEGEP level, we're talking about 17, 18, 19-year-olds who like the idea of help, but sometimes they have trouble navigating the system to find it. So we found we've grouped all of our professional help services in one area of the school. So physically, you walk into the wing, as we call it, and all of our help services are there. So this makes it easy for students to find people. It also allows it to be discreet. So a student can walk into the wing for multiple reasons, and they're not labeled with, I'm going to see the social worker, I have mental health issues. So it really allows them to find the services in a way that are comfortable for them. And then you need internally in the institutions, internal allies. So we spend a lot of time educating our teachers about what our professional help services can offer and where students go to get those services. So our teachers can encourage students to go and seek the help, or they can discreetly drop a name to one of our professionals and they'll reach out to make sure that the student is finding and seeking the resources that we need. So the whole community has to work together, but I think that support is really the key for those students once they're inside our organizations.
Thank you very much, Angela. And I love that notion of the wing where you know, to lower stigma, to encourage that cross-fertilization of ideas and support. It seems so simple and obvious, right? But I'm going to be turning to you now again, Angela, with a targeted question. Here it is. English language educational institutions play an important role in preparing English speakers to enter the labor market. Obviously, you know that. How are English language educational institutions faring right now, and what kind of changes are needed?
Well, thank you for that, Lorraine. English language institutions, they're under pressure right now. Many of us, not all of us, but many of us are small. So naturally, we are trying to do more with less. And this has an impact on our human, material, financial resources. And we still have to run our institutions. So we still have to do all of the basic operations with sometimes less. As we say at St. Lawrence, we have one person per chair. So if we lose that person, things get complicated. As I mentioned in my other points today, it also limits the diversity that we can offer. Having the full scope of services or programs that we're able to offer, that can also have an impact at that level. The current labor market is also making it more and more difficult for our institutions in the sense that it can be difficult to keep our employees. The public sector is not necessarily as attractive as it might have been even a couple of years ago. And then the ability to rehire when we do lose those people. So we have a few empty chairs right now at the CEGEP, and it's taking us months and months to fill them. So the pressure is then felt throughout the organization because that has ripple effects. And John, you alluded to the new charter for the French language, and that of course is also adding pressure. The cap on the number of students for CEGEPs, we've learned that there will be a cap not only on regular day, but also in continuing education. So that will impact the type of vocational and technical programs that we can offer. And of course, then we're touching job security for our teachers and for our staff. And we know it's with the CEGEP level that we have further challenges that are coming with the courses that we have to add and that we have to develop in French. There's the additional burden, if I can say it that way, of translating all of our official documentation into French and writing, emails and our internal communications in both languages. So I guess for changes, which is the second part of your question, Lorraine, if, I understand the need for French, and I support everything that Christine and John have alluded to as well, that there does need to be French integrated into the programs. But if there could be maybe separate guidelines within Law 14 for our public institutions that have been created for the English-speaking community, could we have a little, break from the need to translate all of our official documentation into English when our public really, they want to read it in English. They're not going to go looking for it in French. It seems like a small change, but it would certainly alleviate some of the pressure. But I also think that our educational institutions can do more, as Christine was mentioning. We need to get more creative. We need to create more partnerships at all the different levels of education. So through our vocational, then through our technical, and all the way up to university, if we can have springboards that help people improve their employability, improve their skill set throughout their careers, as workers in the labor market. I think that this would help the employability of the English-speaking population in the province of Quebec, and it would also hopefully help them feel like they are part of the Quebec community.
Excuse me. Thank you, Christine. Angela, sorry, my phone rang. I've got too many screens happening right now. Adrian, do you have comments to make on Angela's presentation just now?
Not many. I think Angela is perfectly positioned, did a perfect job of presenting many of the challenges faced by educational institutions. I would add that, given the labor shortage and the fact that Angie is having issues at her institution to fill key positions, we're asking, in an ideal world, we would ask universities to take on more in terms of responsibility for the transition from the education sphere to the workforce. For example, programs where companies partner with universities to create programs to ease the transition. I mean, there are great programs like that in place, but again, we're putting a greater burden on universities as well as CEGEPs to do that, to help with that transition. It's just an enormous challenge. That's all I'll add. If we're asking for universities and CEGEPs to do more to ease that transition, that requires human resources to put into place those programs, to create those internship opportunities and the partnership building that internships require. It's an enormous challenge, and thank you for speaking to it so well, Angie.
Thanks, Adrian. I heard someone say recently we're putting an impossible burden on our CEGEPs now. There's just so much going into what we expect. Christine, do you have anything to add to Angela's comment?
Well, I do. Definitely. Look, I completely agree with Angela. We're wasting money and time and energy on this, translating into French and making sure everything's available for who and for what. Some things just don't make sense to me when we're already so stretched out. Why would we waste our energy? So, we have to learn to build capacity from within. I think, and I keep saying it, the partnerships, like we can do more just together. We can do so much more already. Like today, I've made some links already, to maybe be able to offer to give more accessibility to university in our regions, right? So we need to lean more on each other for a lot of things. We don't tend to do it. We tend to be like our communities. We isolate ourselves, and I say that, I say it because I see it more because I'm Francophone. I was raised French, and I went to English school. I'm a product of vocational education. That's how I worked on my English and went from there. So I'm able to see it from both sides. And, I can really say that sometimes I feel like the Anglophones don't feel like they deserve the same share as the Francophones, but we totally do. We've earned it. We've worked for it. It's ours, just like it's theirs. We have to ask for more. be our own advocates as well for our clientele and for our population. But we need to lean more on each other.
Thank you, Christine. And I love that you explained that you were a Francophone and you say we when you talk about Anglophones. It's it shows the complexity and the of what we're talking about when we talk about language and language groups and so on. And John, have you got comments to make on Angela's presentation?
It was a great response, not just from Angela, but Adrian's and Christine's as well. So I don't really have too much to say, except for maybe echoing a bit of Christine in the sense of I think I don't see kind of what benefit right now is coming about really framing this as English or French or kind of having even our institutions as an English institution or French institution, like and kind of excluding groups and just deciding like budgets based on the language this population speaks most. So any kind of steps in the direction of kind of trying to break down this divide, this linguistic divide, if you want to call it that, which a lot of people are already moving from or getting sick of, I'm in favor of.
Thank you. What an amazing panel and what insights and what knowledge in the room. It's really humbling and wonderful to see. We're going to turn now to a general discussion among the panelists, and after that, those of you in the audience, I'll turn to some questions in the Q&A. So I can see there are at least 5 questions in Q&A, so I'll just ask one short question for all the panelists to turn to a very positive note. What is one successful or helpful initiative you've heard of or you would like to see to improve student retention and ability for students to complete their education in Quebec and enter their desired careers here? So a best practice or a wish. And how about we just take 1 minute each? I'll go in the usual order. Let's see. So John just spoke, so I'll start with Angela. Do you have one thing you would like to see? In 1 minute, let's hear your dream.
Well, my dream would be to continue some of the things, or one of the elements that we see here at St. Lawrence. And just like in high school, one of the ways that students succeed better and the retention is improved is if they get involved in their school. If they join a sports team or sociocultural activities, if they join a club, if they're in the student association. And we've seen at St. Lawrence in the past 2 years that 40% of our students are involved either as an athlete or in the sociocultural activities that we offer. So we're small, but we're obviously doing something right. And we're able to respond to students when they come and see us and they say, I'd like to start a club about this. We try to make it possible as much as we can in order to give students that sense of belonging and that way to find their inner community within our greater community. So that, I think, is something that we need to pay attention to, that in our educational institutions, there's the academic side, which is very important, but there's the other side that we also have the responsibility of developing in our students. It's their other talents and their other interests outside of their classes, and that's what helps keep them anchored in the education system a little bit longer.
Wow, Adrian, beat that.
I can't. Lorraine, it's good practice to ask, not to ask one panelist to beat the other panelist at something in the middle of a conference. I'll try.
I was just kidding. We go way back, Adrian and I.
I know. Thank you, Angie. Okay. So the question was, in our own work experience, what have we seen that have been great programs that have a positive effect on retention? overall. So I would mention that there are several federal government work programs that are excellent for English-speaking youth, and that our English-speaking youth community accesses regularly. The Young Canada Works program, the Canada Summer Jobs program offers opportunities for youth to have a first-time job experience, which is so valuable. The Odyssey program as well. We certainly hope those programs will be continued by the federal government in the new action plan for official languages. There are programs such as the one called the Beat the Odds internship program at Concordia University that are specifically meant for youth who may face multiple barriers to employment based on the many communities with which they identify, etc., and their histories. Those kind of programs that fully fund youth to have job experiences help community organizations like ours fill our positions, and we also learn from those experiences. Angela mentioned student societies and associations. Absolutely. Youth who get involved in their school in some way or another stay involved more often. And we also know that student societies and associations are often the best communicators of job opportunities to those English-speaking youth. That's an incredibly important role that they're playing. Universities create networking events and summits throughout the year that are incredibly important for youth to make their first contacts with potential employers and build a network. Also, we have to give a nod to community organizations. Community organizations play a huge role, creating career fairs, projects, programs, and initiatives where youth get to see themselves take as leaders in their communities, taking leadership roles in their communities through these projects and initiatives. And many of those career fairs and other partnerships would not exist without community organizations playing an important role. So those are some of the things that I've seen in through my own work that support employment prospects for young people and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrienne. Next, I lost track of the order, but it's okay. John, one best practice or wish.
Sure, it's a bit tough just from my position, working not in the post-secondary environment, but to one thing we've done as a community organization is create a kind of job matching venture, if you will, or program aimed at matching job seekers from particular communities that have barriers in entering the labor force, and matching them with employers. And the way we try to do it is, sensitizing employers to the challenges facing this group of job seekers. We already talked about the challenges employers are currently facing, and at the same time having kind of, for the job seeker side, kind of offering them the resources that could be helpful in terms of either upskilling them or having them find the right kind of match in regards to an employer. So collaboration between community organizations or other organizations and employers and the university as well, or post-secondary institution. For me, I see a lot of promise in these kinds of programs. The one we're doing at the BCRC is fairly new, so I can't really talk too much about its impact yet. But I think this is just a means for helping people better integrate into the job market here.
Thank you, John. Very interesting community-based initiative. And Christine?
Yeah, one of the things that we do to agree with Angela, it's very, very important to support our clientele, our students. And the Ministry of Education has put in place some special measures for us in the adult sector. The measures 15161, volets 1 through 4, where you can go get money to work on perseverance. So we do that, or literacy. So we do that. I apply on 6 measures every year. I've been doing that for 6 years. So I go get myself like a good chunk of money, between 200 and 300,000 a year, to work on to provide, whether it's snacks. I mean, we're at that level here where food is fundamental for our clientele. You can't learn if you're hungry. So we feed them, we give them all kinds of services that create an attachment to the center. They have to know that we care and we're their advocates. We have to show them that we're their advocates and that, you know, we care for them. So that's what we do. That's our best practice here.
How amazing that it comes to that, Christine, and how important.
And partnerships with our community organizations, absolutely, ladies, that you're totally right. Like some of these measures demand that you have partnerships with community organizations. So I partner with CAS, I partner with our Family Ties to do all kinds of projects with them.
Obviously, we have more to say than minutes allow. We have 1 minute left. So I'm going to ask PERT something. There are some excellent questions in the Q&A. I know PERT is taking note of this, you know, of our panel, and I'm going to ask PERT to make a note. So I apologize to people in the audience. We don't have time to address the Q&A. I'll ask PERT to make note of the questions and to distribute them to our panelists, and maybe we can come up with a way for people to be for some way for if any of the panelists have things to add to address that and share it with the people in the conference today. Nick Salter is going to close up the panel. So I just will say thank you from the bottom of my heart to the panelists and also to the audience members for your time and your ideas. And now I will turn the floor over to Nick, who will provide closing remarks.
Well, thanks, Lorraine. Thanks so much. And thanks to all our panelists as well. That was a great panel, and enjoyed hearing from you all. And Lorraine, absolutely, we will take note of those questions and see what we can do. But more than anything, it just tells me that this is the beginning of a conversation, or perhaps the middle of a conversation, and there are many more conversations to be had as a group around these kind of topics. And we look forward to doing this kind of event again with our partners. And also we're looking forward to hopefully holding an in-person event with partners, most likely in the spring, but stay tuned for that. But yeah, it's my pleasure, absolutely, to provide you with a brief recap of what we heard today. So if you remember early this morning, we had our Learning French for the Workforce in Quebec panel. We heard how many English speakers or linguistic minorities have a strong interest in learning the French language. And approaching this desire with understanding, with empathy, and with positive reinforcement is actually the best way to drive language learning. We heard that many employers recognize the advantage of language learning for their employees, and under the right conditions are willing to have their employees learn language on the job. And we also heard a lot about flexibility for program delivery, which needs to be adapted to the specific needs of the learner and also the needs of the employer. This means adapting vocabulary and training to specific industries. And I think we were encouraged not to see language learning courses as these kind of defined square boxes, but rather places where there's often an opportunity for creativity and innovation and how French language learning is delivered. We also heard, again this morning, from our panelists to tackle the issue of French in Quebec's professional orders. What I found particularly striking was the discussion on the importance of collaboration between government, the education sector, and professional orders. It was made clear that there needs to be kind of systemic changes that will enable institutions to better support French language learners entering regulated professions. I also appreciated hearing about the important role that professional orders could play in making language training part of the kind of continuous learning and professional development process for professionals. And the importance of creating a variety of language learning approaches to fit the different learning needs of professionals, whether it's on-the-job language training or bridging programs to help them integrate into French language work environments. And obviously, we just had this amazing panel with lots of questions and lots of discussion and clearly lots of interest. It was thought-provoking, to hear that Quebec's English-speaking youth face the challenge as they graduate, decide whether they decide to stay or decide to go and leave the province. I absolutely loved the John's. I think John was on this one. The learn as you earn. I absolutely love that. So employers are starting to shift and to recognize their responsibility in accommodating recently graduated English-speaking students. Examples of them adapting hiring practices and understanding the need to help these new workers to improve their French language training on the job. It was really heartening to hear Christine's example of this. And then there's the importance of building intersectionality, not only into our solutions and programs, into our community organizations, but also into our research, our thinking, and our hiring from the get-go. And that involves seeking out diverse candidates, but also involves understanding the support mechanisms they might require, for example, childcare. And vocational technical training is always such an important, relatively short way for English speakers to improve their employability, and is key for lifelong learning and professional development. So these are just a few of our thoughts, a lot more to digest, and we'll obviously try to get the videos online and share more content with you and keep this conversation going. But it's now my pleasure to turn it over to James Hughes, PERT's president, a person whose implication in the employment sphere for English speakers in Quebec dates to his role as the founding president of Yes Employment and Entrepreneurship. So Jim, over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Nick, and hi everyone. It's been just tremendous to be a part of this virtual activity. This is not an easy environment to bring people together, but I think we can all agree that we have found a way to be together and to learn together, and I think that's amazing. And I don't have a lot to say. I do have a few perhaps policy-oriented comments to make that may be helpful for us to think about moving together forward into the future, but just a couple of initial thoughts. I love the way this whole event has kind of been teed up. But Bill Flock, you remember right off the top, was talking about the new infrastructure that we have as a community that we didn't have before. That brings, amongst other things, brings us together in events like this. PERT is part of that new infrastructure. It didn't exist 2 years ago, and to talk in these intersectoral ways in the way we are right now is really a breath of fresh air. And it's not obviously just PERT. There's other new institutions, new initiatives going on. There's almost a sense that we're calling out to each other in our community from one corner of the province to the other. Here I'm pointing to the map of Quebec right now, all over the place, that we are one, we are here, we will stay, we will survive, and hopefully we will thrive. I think it's possible. We're an incredibly tenacious community, incredibly diverse community. And I think together, I think it's almost like we heard summarizing through many of these presentations and panels, that that is the pathway to indeed being full partners in the building of this province we call our own. Okay, so and indeed a lot of work has been done, but here are some things I think we have to think about really seriously in terms of the going forward. And John said, the P word. There's a lot of politics out here, but we have the capacity to be political without being partisan, without being, I think, exaggerated. I think we have a lot to bring to the table. And here's some of the things that I think we should absolutely expect legitimate and reasonable in our dialogue with government going forward. The first thing is Francisization Quebec. It needs to meet the needs of our community. And we need to be engaged in that process. The governance of that new institution is the first question. Is our voice going to be included in the development of the kinds of programs that our communities need to indeed survive and thrive? We need to ensure that targeted language training and accompaniment programs are deployed to ensure individuals with the professional qualifications and certifications get the assistance they need to pass professional order French language exams. It's a bit of a no-brainer, right? We're in a crunch for these types of professions. There is a supply, there is a demand, but so we just got to put the two together, and these are the ways to do it. We also need to make sure that English speakers are able to properly access English language employment services, whether delivered by our own organizations or by community partners willing to hire bilingual staff and offer bilingual services. It's great to hear the example of the onboarding that some employers are doing in that regard, because they have to, and it's not that expensive. And wow, you may have employees for years and years to come if you do it properly. We also want to see government lead by example and develop the programs and pathways to ensure our community is represented at the same proportion in the public sector as we are in the population. How cool would that be? You know, the Welsh Institute, Donna, who we heard yesterday, talked about wanting 1 million Welsh speakers. So what about that target? They actually set a target as a as a minority community in Great Britain about the number of people that are actually speaking a language, should we think about setting a target for the number of people we want working in the Quebec Civil Service? Maybe in the federal civil service too. Everyone knows it's under 1% right now, right? We are 13% of the population of Quebec. And that is not a small gap, folks. That's a massive gap. So should we be targeting within the next 5 years representing 5% of the Quebec workforce? I think it's a legitimate question that we should ask ourselves. And frankly, we have that infrastructure now to ask ourselves, okay? And we need to develop and implement bridging programs, work integrated learning, internships, mentorships, and all these other types of transitional types of machinery that makes it all work. We look forward to continue working with the SRQEA and our new Minister of Finance, Eric Girouard. It's not to be understated that the Minister of Finance is now responsible for the SRQEA. You know, this is frankly good news, bringing an economic point of view to the sociological and linguistic issues that we're facing. Because at the end of the day, the English-speaking community is an amazing resource, always has been for this province, is in massive development, and is putting up its hand to say, what about us? And so to have that type of spokesperson for the community, I think is a very interesting move on the part of the government. I would say a positive one in general. Okay. So let me just leave it at that, folks. Thank you so much for being part of this. Thank you for being part of this event. Hopefully we'll have a lot of other ones. For sure, rendezvous November 2023 at the latest, but I suspect Nick and team, and it's a great team at PERT. They really are amazing. Thank you to them. Maybe have some other events in store for you in between now and then. So thanks again for being part of this, and à la prochaine.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks so much. So I just also wanted to thank again our keynote, thank all of our panelists for being here with us yesterday and today. But as usual, there's a team behind the scenes. I don't know if they're going to be too shy to put on their cameras. Hopefully they aren't. But I wanted to thank our translators. So Sheena and Pascal, thank you. Big applause to you. I wanted to thank Alexandra for the logistics and tech support. Sarah on our team, who coordinated this event, she couldn't be with us here this afternoon, but she played a huge role. And also thank you to Maria. Maria, I hope you're out there and we can maybe see your face. Maybe she's too shy to, but thank you, Maria. All the beautiful graphics you saw, newsletters and all that work, pulling us all together happened from Maria. So thank you. And thank you, Sarah. You were all stars. And thanks to our guests for spending the last 2 days with us. We appreciate it. And as I said, we do want to do something in person. I'm glad, we avoided the snowstorm yesterday. That might have created some issues with this virtual format, and we'll continue to do some virtual events as well, but do hope to do some next events in person so we can all gather together and eat delicious food, as Christine said, and gather as a community. So thank you so much. Thanks to everyone.